The blood on the courtyard stones wasn't Brina's first, and it wouldn't be her last. She lay there, cheek pressed against cold cobblestones that still held yesterday's rain, tasting copper and dirt. Her back screamed where the leather had split skin, but she'd learned years ago not to cry out. Crying just made Marta hit harder. "Useless piece of shit," Marta Fenwick spat, her shadow falling across Brina's face. "Can't even scrub a floor without breaking something." The something had been a clay pitcher. Not expensive, not valuable, just convenient. Marta had been looking for a reason all week, ever since the traveler had left without paying and she'd needed someone to blame. Brina tried to push herself up, but her arms shook. 22 years old, and she felt ancient. The Iron Bell Inn had a way of aging people before their time, grinding them down like millstones, grinding wheat into powder. "Don't bother getting up." Marta's voice shifted, going from angry to something calculated, something that made Brina's stomach clench with dread. "You won't be needing your strength for scrubbing anymore." Brina managed to lift her head. Through the strands of dark hair stuck to her face with sweat and blood, she saw them. Two men standing at the courtyard entrance. Not locals. Their clothes were too clean, their boots too expensive. Merchants, maybe. Or slavers. In Verdun province, there wasn't much difference. "This her?" the taller one asked, barely glancing at Brina's crumpled form. "This is her," Marta confirmed, smoothing her apron with hands that had dealt more bruises than comfort. "Young, strong enough, healthy, mostly." "Mostly," the shorter man repeated, and something about the way he said it made Brina's skin crawl. The tall one approached, his boots clicking against stone. He grabbed Brina's chin, forcing her face up to catch the light. His fingers were cold, clinical, like she was livestock. "Teeth good?" he asked Marta, not Brina. "Good enough." He pried Brina's mouth open, checking like she was a horse at market. She thought about biting him, thought about a lot of things, but the whip marks on her back were already starting to scab, and she knew Marta would just beat her again. She was so fucking tired of being beaten. "Age?" 22, Marta said. Give or take. Give or take, because nobody knew exactly when Brina had been born. She'd been left at the inn's doorstep as an infant, another unwanted mouth in a province full of them, and Marta had raised her like a particularly resentful farmer raises a pig, with just enough food to keep breathing and just enough cruelty to ensure obedience. The man released Brina's face and stepped back, wiping his hand on his coat like he'd touched something dirty. "The buyer specified someone resilient," he said. "Someone who won't break easy. She looked resilient to you." "She survived me for 22 years, Marta said flatly. "That should tell you something." The two men exchanged glances. Some silent conversation Brina wasn't privy to. Then the shorter one reached into his coat and pulled out a leather purse. It clinked when he tossed it to Marta. "Half now," he said. "Half when we deliver her intact." Marta caught the purse, and the smile that spread across her face made Brina's blood run cold. She'd seen that smile before, when she'd sold off the last kitchen girl to a mining camp up north. The girl had been 15. She'd cried the whole way out of town. Brina wasn't going to cry. "Where—" she started, her voice coming out rougher than intended. "Where are you taking me?" "Shut up," the tall man said without heat, like he was commenting on the weather. "I asked a question." The tall man's boot connected with her ribs. Not hard enough to break anything. They needed her intact, after all, but hard enough to remind her of her place. "You don't ask questions anymore," he said. "You don't talk unless you're spoken to. You're cargo now. Understand?" Brina understood a lot of things. She understood that Marta had finally found a way to profit from 2 decades of keeping an unwanted child alive. She understood that whatever waited for her at the end of this transaction was probably worse than the Iron Bell, which took some doing. She understood that nobody in this courtyard, not the stable boy watching from the shadows, not the cook peering through the kitchen window, not a single fucking soul would lift a finger to help her. She'd always been alone. This was just more obvious about it. "Get her on her feet," the shorter man said. "We're burning daylight." They hauled Brina up by her arms, and the world tilted sideways. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. Marta's punishment for the broken pitcher had started with skipped meals, and the beating hadn't helped. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. "Walk," the tall man ordered. So she walked, through the courtyard where she'd scrubbed stones until her hands bled, past the kitchen where she'd learned to cook before she'd learned to read, through the common room where she'd served drinks to men who looked through her like she was furniture. Marta watched from the doorway, counting coins. "Don't come back," she called as Brina stumbled into the street. Not a warning, a promise. Brina didn't look back. The wagon waited at the end of the street, just a covered cart pulled by two horses that looked as tired as she felt. The back was already loaded with supplies, crates of dried goods, barrels of what might have been salted meat, tools wrapped in canvas, and shackles. "No," Brina said, her feet stopping of their own accord. "No, I'll walk. I won't run." "Sure you won't," the tall man said, and grabbed her wrist. The iron closed around her wrists with a click that sounded like every door she'd ever known slamming shut. They weren't cruel about it. The shackles had some give, enough that she could move her hands. But they were absolute, unambiguous. She was property now. They shoved her into the back of the wagon, and she landed hard on sacks of grain that smelled like mildew and rodents. The tall man tied her shackles to an iron ring bolted to the wagon bed, then climbed up front with his partner. 3 days to the mountain pass," she heard the shorter man say. 4 if the weather turns." "Weather's already turning," the tall man replied. "Look at that sky." Brina looked. Through the gap in the canvas covering, she could see clouds building in the north, thick and gray and pregnant with early snow. It was only late autumn, but this far north, winter came when it wanted. The wagon lurched into motion, and Verdun City began to fall away behind them. Nobody waved goodbye. Nobody noticed she was gone. Armat. The first day, Brina told herself she'd escape. She'd wait until they stopped for the night, then somehow slip the shackles or convince them to unchain her. She was good with her hands. She'd learned to pick simple locks out of necessity, sneaking into the Iron Bell's locked pantry when Marta forgot to feed her. But these weren't simple locks. And her captors weren't stupid. They stopped once at midday, letting the horses drink from a stream while they ate strips of jerky and hard cheese. They offered Brina water, held the canteen to her lips like she was an invalid, but no food. "She eats when we camp," the tall one said. His name was Garrett, she'd learned from their conversations. The shorter one was Finn. "Buyer didn't say anything about starving her," Finn pointed out. "Buyer said intact, doesn't mean comfortable." They left her in the wagon, still chained, while they pissed in the bushes and checked the horses' hooves. Brina tested the shackles again. The iron ring didn't budge. The chains were solid. Even if she could somehow break free, she was in the middle of nowhere. The main road had given way to a rough mountain track an hour ago, and she hadn't seen another soul since they'd left Verdun's outskirts. Where would she even run? The second day it started to snow. Not the soft, pretty snow that sometimes fell in Verdun during winter festivals. This was hard snow, driven by wind that cut through the canvas covering like knives. Brina huddled against the grain sacks, pulling her thin dress tight around her shoulders, shivering so hard her teeth rattled. "She gonna freeze back there?" she heard Finn ask. "Not my problem," Garrett replied. "We deliver her alive, not comfortable. Dead from cold is still dead." A moment later, something heavy landed on Brina's legs. A blanket. Rough wool that smelled like horse and mildew, but it was warm. She pulled it around herself with shaking hands and felt something shift in her chest. Not gratitude, exactly. Finn hadn't done it out of kindness. He'd done it because a frozen corpse was worth nothing, and they had a transaction to complete. But it was the first time in recent memory that someone had given her something without expecting payment. The bar was pretty fucking low. That night they made camp in a shallow cave off the mountain track. Garrett built a fire while Finn unloaded supplies, and eventually they unchained Brina from the wagon. Her wrists stayed shackled, but they gave her enough length to eat the stew Finn cooked over the fire. Thin broth with stringy meat and half-rotten vegetables, but it was hot and she was starving. "Where are you taking me?" she asked between bites. "Told you not to talk," Garrett said, but his heart wasn't in it. 2 days on the road had sanded some of the edge off him, or maybe he just figured she'd find out soon enough anyway. "North," Finn answered, stirring the pot. "To the Frost Peak Range." Brina's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. That's past the settlements. There's nothing up there." "There's something," Garrett said. "Or someone, anyway." "Who?" "The man who bought you." "Bought." The word sat in her stomach like lead. What's he want with me? She already knew the answer, had been trying not to think about it for 2 days, but she needed to hear it said out loud. Garrett and Finn exchanged another one of those glances. You ask a lot of questions for cargo, Garrett observed. Humor me, Finn snorted. She's got spine, at least, more than the last one. The last one? Brina's hands tightened on the bowl. There was someone before me? 2 others, Finn admitted. Neither one lasted the journey. First girl tried to run, broke her neck falling down a ravine. Second one just gave up, stopped eating, stopped talking, was dead by the time we reached the pass. Finn, Garrett warned. What? She's going to find out anyway when she meets him. Meets who? Brina demanded. Her voice was louder than she'd intended, bouncing off the cave walls. Who the hell bought me? Garrett leaned forward, and in the firelight his face looked older, tired. Kael Draven, he said quietly. The Butcher of Frost Peak. The name hit Brina like a physical thing. Everyone knew the stories. The man who'd lived alone in the mountains for 5 years. After he'd slaughtered 6 hunters who'd come to drag him back to Verdun for crimes nobody would name. The man who'd skinned them alive and left their bodies for the wolves. The man who wore their bones as warnings. The monster. You're lying, Brina said, but her voice shook. Wish we were, Finn muttered. He pays well, though. Keeps his agreements. Why does a murderer need a... She couldn't even finish the sentence, couldn't make herself say what she was. A slave, a purchase, a thing. He didn't say, Garrett replied. Just put out word 2 months ago that he needed someone. Someone resilient. Someone with nowhere else to go. Someone nobody would miss, Brina finished bitterly. Neither man contradicted her. She set down the bowl, suddenly not hungry anymore. Her mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. A murderer living alone in the mountains, buying women from traders. It didn't take much imagination to figure out what he wanted. I won't go, she said. I'll run. You'll die, Garrett interrupted. We're 2 days into the Frost Peaks now. You run, you freeze. You're not dressed for this cold, you've got no supplies, and you sure as hell don't know the terrain. You'd be dead before sunrise. Maybe I'd rather be dead than what? Finn cut in, and there was something almost sympathetic in his voice. You don't know what he wants yet. Might not be as bad as you're thinking. He's a murderer. So are a lot of people. Finn shrugged. Doesn't mean he's going to murder you. Finn's right, Garrett said, though he looked like the words tasted bad. Draven's been living up here for 5 years without bothering anyone. Far as we know, those hunters were the only ones he's killed, and they had it coming. How do you know? Because we asked around before we agreed to this job. We might be traders, girl, but we're not in the business of delivering women to get butchered. Brina wanted to believe him, wanted to think that maybe, this wasn't as bad as every instinct was screaming it would be. But hope was dangerous. Hope got you killed. Get some sleep, Garrett ordered, standing up and brushing ash from his pants. We've got another 2 days of climbing, and the trail gets worse from here. They chained her to a rock outcropping near the fire, far enough away that she couldn't reach any weapons, close enough that she'd get some warmth. The blanket they gave her was the same rough wool from the wagon, and it smelled like smoke now. Brina lay there, listening to Garrett's snores and Finn's quiet movements as he banked the fire, and tried to make a plan. She could try to run tomorrow. Wait until they stopped to rest the horses, then bolt into the forest. Except Garrett was right. She'd freeze within hours. She was wearing a thin cotton dress and worn-out shoes that were already falling apart. No coat, no gloves, no fucking chance. She could try to kill them, wait until they slept, then somehow get free. And what? Strangle them with shackled hands? Even if she managed it, then she'd be alone in the mountains with no idea how to get back to civilization. She could what? The truth was cold and sharp as the wind outside. She had no good options. She'd never had good options. Her entire life had been a series of bad choices and worse outcomes, and now she was chained in a cave being delivered to a killer. This was always how it was going to end. The thought should have terrified her, should have made her cry or scream or beg. Instead, she just felt tired. So fucking tired. Meb. The third day, the temperature dropped so low that Brina's breath came out in white clouds even inside the wagon. Finn gave her his spare coat, a threadbare thing that barely fit, but it was better than freezing, and Garrett stopped complaining about it. Maybe he was developing a conscience. Maybe he just didn't want to explain to Cale Draven why his purchase had arrived as a corpse. Either way, Brina was grateful. The trail had narrowed to barely more than a goat path, winding between cliffs and over ridges that made her stomach drop. Several times she heard rocks tumbling away beneath the wagon wheels, bouncing down slopes she couldn't see the bottom of. One wrong move and they'd all plummet to their deaths. Part of her wondered if that would be better. "Almost there," Garrett called back around midday. "Another few hours." Brina's heart started hammering. She'd spent the morning trying to prepare herself for whatever was coming, tried to imagine the worst-case scenario so she'd be ready when it happened. But her imagination kept failing, kept hitting a wall where the future just stopped. Through the canvas gap, she could see the landscape changing. The pine forest had given way to bare rock and patches of stubborn scrub brush. Everything was covered in snow. Not the fresh white kind, but the old gray kind that had been there so long it was basically ice. Nothing lived up here. Nothing should live up here. And yet somewhere ahead, a man had built a home. The wagon slowed, and Garrett called the horses to a stop. "End of the line," he announced. "Rest of the way's on foot." They unchained Brina from the wagon, but left the shackles on her wrists. Finn offered her a hand getting down, which she ignored. She might be cargo, but she still had some pride. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground. 3 days of sitting had left her muscles stiff and screaming, and the cold bit through Finn's coat like it wasn't even there. "Where?" she managed through chattering teeth. Garrett pointed up the slope. "Half-mile that way, there's a cabin." Brina squinted through the snow. At first she couldn't see anything except rocks and ice and the endless fucking white. Then, slowly, a shape resolved itself from the landscape. A cabin. More like a fortress, really, built from rough-hewn logs and stone, hunched against the mountainside like it was trying to hide. Smoke rose from a chimney, gray against gray sky. Someone was home. "Come on," Garrett said, grabbing the chain between her wrists. "Let's get this over with." They climbed. The slope was steep and treacherous, covered in loose scree that shifted under their boots. Brina slipped twice, and twice Finn caught her before she tumbled backward. By the time they reached the level ground where the cabin sat, her lungs burned and her legs shook. The cabin was bigger up close. Solid. Well built, with shuttered windows and a heavy door made from planks that looked thick enough to stop an axe, or keep someone inside. Garrett approached the door and knocked. 3 solid strikes that echoed in the thin mountain air. Nothing happened. He knocked again. "Draven, it's Garrett Moss. We have your delivery." Brina's stomach turned over. Delivery. Like she was a package of dried goods. Still nothing. "Maybe he's not home," Finn suggested. "Where the hell would he go?" Garrett knocked a third time, harder. "Draven, we had an agreement." The door swung open. Brina's first thought was that the stories had lied. Cale Draven wasn't a monster. He was just a man. Tall, yes, and broad-shouldered, but human. Maybe 40 years old, with dark hair going gray at the temples and a beard that needed trimming. His eyes were what stopped her cold. Dark. Flat. The kind of eyes that had seen too much and felt too little. The kind of eyes that didn't flinch at violence. "You're late," he said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Weather," Garrett replied, recovering. "Slowed us down. But we got her here intact, like you asked." Draven's gaze shifted to Brina, and she felt it like a physical touch. Assessing. Measuring. Looking for flaws. She lifted her chin and stared back. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe? But it was gone too fast to read. "She's resilient?" Draven asked, still looking at Brina. "Survived Marta Fenwick for 22 years, Garrett said. That answer your question?" Draven's mouth twitched. Might have been a smile. Hard to tell under the beard. "Inside," he ordered, stepping back from the doorway. "What about our payment?" Finn asked quickly. "Inside," Draven repeated. "All of you." Garrett and Finn exchanged nervous glances, but they followed him through the door, pulling Brina along by her chains. The cabin's interior was not what she'd expected. It was warm, for one thing. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, big enough to roast a whole deer. The flames cast flickering light across plank floors that were swept clean and walls lined with shelves. Books. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. More books than Brina had ever seen in one place. There was a table, chairs, a cooking area with pots hanging from hooks, a ladder leading to what must be a sleeping loft. It looked like someone lived here, like someone had made this place a home. Draven moved to a wooden chest near the fireplace and pulled out a leather bag. He tossed it to Garrett, who caught it and immediately checked the contents. "Second half, as agreed," Draven said. "We're done." "Pleasure doing business," Garrett replied, though his voice said otherwise. He grabbed Finn's arm. "Let's go." "Wait," Brina said. The word came out stronger than she'd intended. "You're just leaving me?" "That was the deal," Finn said, and he actually looked sorry about it. "You can't, I don't." She turned to Draven, desperation clawing up her throat. "Please, whatever you paid them, I'll work it off. I'll do anything. Just don't—" "Don't what?" Draven asked quietly. "Don't hurt me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Draven studied her for a long moment, and Brina saw something shift behind those flat eyes, something that might have been pain. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said finally. "Everyone says that." "I'm not everyone." Garrett cleared his throat. "We should go before dark. Trail's dangerous in low light." Draven nodded, not taking his eyes off Brina. "Get out." The two men fled. There was no other word for it. They practically ran out the door, and Brina heard their footsteps crunching away through snow. Then it was just her and the monster. Draven moved to the door and secured it, a heavy bar that dropped into iron brackets. Locked. They were locked in together. Brina's heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Hold still," Draven said, and approached her. She flinched back, chains rattling. He stopped. "I'm just going to take those off." "The shackles?" "Unless you want to keep wearing them." He pulled a key from his pocket, the key that Garrett must have given him, and unlocked the shackles with practiced efficiency. They fell away, and Brina rubbed her wrists where the iron had chafed red marks into her skin. "Thank you," she said automatically, because Marta had beaten manners into her young. "Sit," Draven ordered, gesturing to the table. Brina sat, watched as he moved around the cabin with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of his territory. He poured something from a pot near the fire into 2 wooden cups and brought them to the table. "Drink," he said, sliding 1 cup toward her. "You're half frozen." Brina looked at the cup. Some kind of tea, steam rising in lazy spirals. "Is it poisoned?" she asked. That almost smile flickered across his face again. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have paid for you." "Fair point." She took a sip. The tea was bitter and scalding hot, but it warmed her from the inside out. She wrapped her hands around the cup and waited for whatever came next. Draven sat across from her and drank his own tea in silence. The fire crackled. Wind howled outside. The cabin creaked like an old ship at sea. "Why?" Brina asked finally. "Why did you buy me?" Draven set down his cup. "I need help." "Help with what?" "Living." She waited for him to elaborate. He didn't. "I don't understand," she said. "You don't have to understand yet." He stood, moved to a storage chest, and pulled out folded fabric, a dress, rough spun but clean, and boots, real boots, not the falling apart things she'd been wearing. "You'll sleep in the loft tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about expectations." "Expectations?" "Work." He tossed the clothes onto the table. "I didn't bring you here to be a prisoner. I brought you here because I need another pair of hands. Someone who can haul water and chop wood and help process game when I make a kill. Someone who won't run screaming at the first sign of blood." Brina stared at him. "That's it? You want a farm hand?" "More or less." "You paid traders to bring me across the mountain so I could chop wood?" "The village wouldn't send anyone. Town council put out word that I was dead to them 5 years ago. I tried hiring help through legitimate channels, but nobody would come, so I found alternate arrangements." He met her eyes. "You wanted the truth." "That's the truth." "But the stories, they say you murdered 6 men, that you're dangerous." I am dangerous, Draven replied calmly. But not to you. Not unless you give me reason. And if I try to leave, then you leave. But you won't make it back to civilization. The trail we came up is the only way down, and it's a 3-day journey for someone who knows what they're doing. You don't. He paused. You'll die out there, girl. Wolves, or cold, or a fall. Doesn't matter which. You'll die. Brina wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, that she'd find a way. But she'd seen the trail, seen the cliffs, and the endless snow. He was right. She was trapped. Not by chains or locked doors, but by geography and survival. So I work for you, she said slowly. I help you live. And in exchange? You don't die, Draven said simply. You get food, shelter, warmth, safety. From everyone except you. From everyone including me. He turned away, moving toward the ladder to the loft. Get some sleep. We start tomorrow at first light. He climbed up to the loft, and Brina heard a rope being pulled. Some kind of privacy curtain, maybe, to separate the sleeping area. She was alone in the main room. Alone with the fire and the tea and the quiet. Alone with the slow, terrifying realization that she might have just traded one prison for another. But at least this one was warm. She changed into the dress Draven had given her. It fit surprisingly well, and pulled on the boots. They were worn but solid, clearly made by someone who knew their craft. The loft ladder creaked as she climbed, but she was too tired to care about stealth. The space above was small but organized. A pallet with actual blankets, a chest for storage, a window shuttered against the cold, and a curtain dividing the space in half. On the other side, she could hear Draven breathing, slow, steady, already asleep or faking it. Brina lay down on the pallet and pulled the blankets up to her chin. They smelled like pine and smoke and something else she couldn't name. Not unpleasant, just different. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, the fire burned. And somewhere in between, Brina Cole closed her eyes and tried to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd survived this after all. She'd been wrong about a lot of things in her life. She hoped this wasn't one of them. Brina woke to the smell of burning wood and something cooking that made her stomach growl so loud she was sure it would wake the dead. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Forgot about the wagon and the shackles and the mountain pass. Then she opened her eyes and saw the slanted ceiling above her, the rough-hewn beams still dark with night, and it all came rushing back. The monster's cabin, Cale Draven, the man who'd bought her like livestock and then told her to chop wood. She sat up, muscles screaming in protest. 3 days in a wagon, followed by a climb up a mountain, had left her feeling like she'd been beaten with hammers. Every part of her hurt. Light filtered up from below, along with the sound of something sizzling in a pan. Draven was already awake, already moving around. She could hear his footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crossing the floor. Brina pushed off the blankets and climbed down the ladder, her new boots making soft thuds on each rung. The main room was brighter than she'd expected. Morning sun streamed through gaps in the shutters, turning the dust motes into tiny stars. Draven stood at the cooking area, his back to her, tending a pan over the fire. He'd changed clothes since yesterday, wore a clean shirt now, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars. Old scars, the kind that came from knives and teeth and things that wanted you dead. Sit, he said without turning around, like he had eyes in the back of his head. Brina sat at the table watching him work. He moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been cooking alone for a long time. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Just the quiet competence of practice. He slid a plate in front of her a few minutes later, eggs scrambled with some kind of dried meat, a chunk of dark bread, and something that might have been wild onions. It smelled like heaven. Eat, he ordered, setting his own plate down across from her. She didn't need to be told twice. The food disappeared so fast she barely tasted it, shoveling it in like someone might take it away. When she looked up, Draven was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. When's the last time you ate a full meal? He asked. 2 days ago? Maybe 3? She couldn't remember anymore. Time had gotten blurry in the wagon. You eat like someone who's been starved. I have been. The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Marta Fenwick wasn't big on feeding the help, said it made us soft. Draven's jaw tightened. Marta Fenwick sounds like she needs killing. Brina barked out a laugh before she could stop herself. Get in line! They ate in silence after that, and Brina used the time to study her surroundings more carefully than she'd been able to last night. The cabin really was well built. No gaps in the walls, no drafts sneaking through cracks. The fireplace was massive and efficient, throwing heat that reached every corner. The books on the shelves were worn but cared for, their spines cracked from reading. Someone lived here. Not just survived. Lived. Why books? She asked, nodding toward the shelves. Draven followed her gaze. Gets lonely up here, books don't judge. Do you judge? Everyone judges? He stood collecting their plates. Difference is whether you act on it. Before Brina could figure out what that meant, he'd moved to the door and was pulling on a heavy coat lined with fur. Come on, I'll show you around. Around what? We're in the middle of nowhere. Nowhere still needs managing. He tossed her a coat from a hook near the door, thick wool with patches on the elbows. Put that on, it's cold. It was more than cold. When Draven opened the door, the wind that blasted in felt like it had teeth. Brina pulled the coat tight and followed him outside, squinting against the brightness. The cabin sat on a small plateau carved into the mountainside, surrounded by rocks and scrub pine that looked half dead from cold. To the east, the slope dropped away into nothing, just clouds and hints of valleys far below. To the west, the mountain rose higher, its peak lost in mist. Draven led her around the side of the cabin to where a lean-to sheltered a pile of split wood that must have taken months to accumulate. Next to it was a chopping block with an axe buried in its surface, and beyond that, a smokehouse built from river stones. Wood needs to stay dry, Draven said, gesturing to the lean-to. We burn through about 10 logs a day this time of year, more when it gets colder. It gets colder than this? This is autumn. Wait until January. He moved to the smokehouse and pulled open the door. Inside, several large cuts of meat hung from hooks, curing in the smoke from a small fire pit. Game needs processing within a day of the kill or it spoils. You know how to skin an animal? Brina shook her head. You'll learn. He closed the smokehouse door and continued walking, leading her to a spring that bubbled up from between two rocks. The water was so cold it steamed in the morning air. Water supply. Doesn't freeze even in deep winter. We haul from here twice a day, morning and evening. There's buckets in the cabin. How long have you been doing this alone? 5 years? He said it like it was nothing, like spending 5 years alone in the mountains was just a normal Tuesday. Don't you go crazy without anyone to talk to? Draven stopped walking and turned to face her. His eyes were flat again, that deadness back in them. I was already crazy. That's why I'm here. Before Brina could respond to that, he was moving again, leading her to a small garden plot that looked abandoned. Dead plants poked through snow, brown and brittle. Used to grow vegetables, he said. Gave up after the second year. Season's too short this high up. Everything dies before it matures. So what do you eat? Just meat? Mostly. Trade for dried goods when the traders come through in summer. They bring flour, salt, sugar, things I can't make or hunt. He glanced at her. They used to bring news, too. Haven't asked for that in 3 years. Why not? Don't care what's happening down there anymore. He gestured vaguely toward the valleys below. That world doesn't want me, and I don't want it. They walked back toward the cabin, and Brina's mind churned with questions she didn't know how to ask. Finally, she just picked one and threw it out there. Why did those hunters come after you? Draven stopped with his hand on the cabin door. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said very quietly, because I killed someone they cared about. Who? Doesn't matter anymore. They're all dead now. He pulled open the door. Get inside. You've got work to do. The work started immediately and didn't stop. Draven handed her one of the buckets from beside the spring and showed her how to haul water without spilling half of it on the walk back. It took 3 trips to fill the large barrel inside the cabin, and by the time she finished, her arms burned and her back ached. Good, Draven said, not looking up from where he was sharpening a knife at the table. Now the wood. Hauling wood was worse than hauling water. The logs were heavy and awkward, and the bark scraped her hands raw even through the gloves Draven had given her. She made a dozen trips from the woodpile to the cabin, stacking logs beside the fireplace until Draven finally nodded. That'll do for today. Tomorrow you'll chop. Tomorrow? You think that pile stays full by itself? He set down the knife and stood. I'll teach you. It's not complicated, just takes practice. Brina looked at her hands. They were already blistered despite the gloves. How long have you been doing this? All of it? 5 years. But I grew up doing labor. My father was a woodsman before... He stopped. Before what, he didn't say, and Brina knew better than to push. They worked through the afternoon in near silence, broken only by Draven's occasional instructions. He showed her how to gut a rabbit he'd trapped that morning, his hands quick and sure as he peeled back skin and removed organs. The smell made her gag, but she forced herself to watch, to learn. You'll be doing this on your own eventually, he said, not unkindly. Better get used to it. Does it ever stop being disgusting? No, but you stop caring. He tossed the guts into a bucket. These go outside for the scavengers. Waste nothing up here. Can't afford to. By the time the sun started setting, Brina was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced at the Iron Bell. That had been a different kind of tired. The grinding weariness of repetitive tasks and too little sleep. This was the bone-deep fatigue of muscles pushed past their limits. Wash up, Draven said, nodding toward a basin of water he'd set near the fire. Then eat. Dinner was the rabbit, roasted over the fire with wild herbs that Draven had hung from the rafters to dry. It was simple and it was perfect, and Brina ate until her stomach hurt. Tomorrow you start learning to use the axe, Draven said as they cleaned up. Day after that, we'll check the trap line. Day after that, depending on the weather, I'll show you the boundaries. Boundaries of what? My land. He gestured vaguely outward, about 5 miles in every direction. Past that, you're on your own if something goes wrong. What kind of something? Wolves, bears, cliffs, weather. He shrugged. Lots of ways to die up here, best to know where the safe zones are. Brina set down the bowl she'd been drying. You keep talking about death, about dying. Do you want me to be scared? I want you to be smart. Draven met her eyes. Fear keeps you careful. Careful keeps you breathing. You're not in Verdun anymore, girl. Up here, one mistake can kill you. My name is Brina, not girl. Something flickered across his face, that almost smile again. Brina, then. And you can call me Kael. Draven sounds like someone's trying to write a bad legend. It was the first joke she'd heard him make, and it startled a laugh out of her. So you do have a sense of humor. Had to keep it somewhere. He moved toward the ladder. Get some sleep. Tomorrow starts early. Brina climbed to the loft a few minutes later, her body already half asleep before her head hit the pallet. Through the curtain dividing the space, she could hear Kael settling in for the night, the creak of his own pallet, the rustle of blankets. Kael? She said into the darkness. What? Thank you for the food and the clothes and not being... She struggled to find the right words. Not being what I thought you'd be. Silence. Then, don't thank me yet. You haven't been here long enough. But his voice didn't sound cruel when he said it, just tired. Brina closed her eyes and let sleep take her. The days blurred together after that, falling into a rhythm that was exhausting and somehow comforting at the same time. Wake before dawn, haul water, stack wood, help prepare food. Learn whatever skill Kael decided she needed that day. He taught her to swing an axe without taking off her own foot, how to split logs along their grain instead of fighting against it. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her arms stopped shaking when she lifted the buckets. He taught her to read animal tracks in the snow, the difference between deer and elk, how to tell if a wolf pack had passed through recently. He showed her which plants were edible and which would kill her, how to find her way back to the cabin using the shape of the mountains as a map. Why are you teaching me this? She asked one afternoon, a week into her stay. They were checking the trap line, walking single file through snow that came up to their knees. Because knowledge keeps you alive. Kael stopped at a snare and knelt to examine it, empty. He reset it with practiced hands. And because if something happens to me, you need to be able to survive until the traders come in summer. What would happen to you? I could fall, break a leg, get sick. He stood and brushed snow from his pants. could get killed by the same things that want to kill you. I'm not immortal, Brina. She'd started to believe he was. Watching him move through the mountains, so sure of every step, so unbothered by cold that made her teeth chatter, it was easy to think he was something more than human. But he wasn't. He was just a man who'd learned to survive in impossible conditions, and now he was teaching her to do the same. Next one's yours, Kyle said, moving to the next snare. Show me how to check it. Brina knelt in the snow, ignoring the cold soaking through her pants. The snare was empty, but the trigger looked off. She adjusted it, mimicking the way Kyle's hands had moved. Good, he said. You're learning. The praise was small, barely there, but it warmed something in her chest that had been cold for a long time. That night, after dinner, Kyle pulled down one of the books from his shelf, a thick volume with water-stained pages, and set it on the table. Can you read? He asked. A little. Marta had taught her, mostly so she could read orders and recipes. Nothing beyond that. Not good enough. He opened the book. We've got long winter nights ahead. You might as well use them for something. So they read. Kyle would read a passage aloud, then have Brina repeat it, correcting her pronunciation when she stumbled. The book was about plants and their properties, medicinal uses, which ones were poisonous, how to prepare tinctures and salves. This is a textbook, Brina said, frowning at the dense text. Where did you get it? My mother was a healer. This was hers. Kale's finger traced a line of text. She taught me some before she died. Figured I should keep learning. How did she die? His finger stopped moving. Same thing that kills most people around here, winter. She got sick and didn't get better. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was 20 years ago. But his voice said it still hurt, that grief didn't follow a schedule. They read until the fire burned low and Brina's eyes started crossing from exhaustion. When she finally climbed to the loft, her head was full of Latin, plant names, and dosing instructions, and for the first time in years, she felt like she'd learned something that mattered. 2 weeks in, the first real storm hit. Brina woke to the sound of wind screaming like something alive, rattling the shutters and howling down the chimney. Snow had drifted through the cracks around the door, creating small white dunes on the floor. Stay inside today, Kale ordered, already up and banking the fire. This is a bad one. He wasn't kidding. By midday, the wind was so loud they had to shout to hear each other. Snow fell so thick that when Brina looked out through a gap in the shutters, she couldn't see more than 3 feet. The cabin groaned like a living thing, beams creaking under the assault. Several times, Brina thought the roof might tear off, but it held. Is it always like this? She yelled over the wind. Sometimes worse, Kyle yelled back. He was checking the walls, making sure no leaks had opened up. Why I built solid, roofs rated for 3 feet of snow. What happens if it gets more than that? We dig out or we suffocate? He said it like he was commenting on the weather. Hasn't happened yet. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days trapped inside with nothing to do but read and talk and try not to go crazy from cabin fever. Brina learned more about Kyle in those 3 days than she had in the previous 2 weeks. She learned that he'd grown up in a village called Northridge, 2 days south of Verdun, that his father had died in a logging accident when Kyle was 15, leaving him to support his mother and younger sister. What happened to your sister? Brina asked on the second day, sitting cross-legged near the fire. Kyle was quiet for a long time. Then, she fell in love with the wrong man. I tried to stop it. Didn't work out. Is that why the hunters came? Part of it. He stared into the flames. The man she loved was connected. Important family. When I killed him, I killed their future. They wanted revenge. Did he deserve it? The man you killed? Kyle's hands clenched. He beat her, put her in the ground with his fists. So yes, he deserved it. Brina's chest tightened. I'm sorry. Everyone's sorry. Doesn't bring her back. He stood abruptly. I'm going to check the chimney. He climbed the ladder to the loft, leaving Brina alone with the fire and the weight of his grief. She understood now, understood why he'd left, why he'd killed the hunters who came for him, why he lived alone on a frozen mountain where the past couldn't reach him. He was running from the same thing she was, a world that took everything and gave nothing back. On the third day, the storm broke. Brina woke to silence so profound it was almost painful. No wind, No howling, just the soft crackle of the fire. She climbed down to find Kyle already at the door, shoving it open against the snow that had drifted against it. Morning light streamed in, blindingly bright. "Come on," he said. "We need to dig out before the next one hits." They spent the morning shoveling snow away from the door and the woodpile, clearing paths to the spring and the smokehouse. The snow was waist-deep in places, and Brina's back screamed in protest by the time they finished. "Good work," Kyle said, leaning on his shovel. He was breathing hard, face flushed from exertion. "You're getting stronger." Brina looked down at her hands. The blisters had calloused over. Her arms were leaner, corded with new muscle from weeks of hauling and chopping. She was changing, becoming something different from the girl who'd been beaten in a courtyard and sold like livestock. "Kyle," she said. "Yeah? Do you ever regret it, living up here alone?" He thought about that, staring out at the mountains that stretched forever in every direction. "Sometimes. Usually when I'm sick or hurt and there's nobody to help. But then I remember what it was like down there, and I figure this is better. Better than people? Better than the wrong people." He looked at her. "You're not wrong people, Brina." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in years. A month in, Brina woke to find Kale standing at the window, staring out at something she couldn't see. "What's wrong?" she asked, climbing down from the loft. "Smoke," he pointed. "South Ridge. Someone's camping." Brina peered through the gap in the shutters. She couldn't see any smoke, but Kyle's eyes were better. He'd spent 5 years learning to read these mountains. "Traders?" she asked. "Wrong season. Traders don't come until late spring." His jaw was tight. "Could be hunters." "Hunters for what?" "For me." He moved away from the window. "Get dressed. We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" "For whatever comes." He pulled a rifle down from where it hung above the door. Brina had noticed it before but hadn't thought much about it. Now, watching him check the chamber with practiced efficiency, she realized this wasn't just decoration. This was survival. "I can't shoot," she said. "Then stay behind me and don't get in the way." He grabbed his coat. "I'm going to scout. You stay here, bar the door, don't open it for anyone but me." "Kyle, bar the door, Brina." His voice was hard now, the flat deadness back in his eyes. "I mean it." He left, and she barred the door with shaking hands. The hours that followed were the longest of her life. She paced the cabin, jumping at every sound, imagining armed men bursting through the walls, imagining Kyle dead in the snow. When the knock finally came, she almost screamed. "It's me," Kyle's voice called. "Let me in." She threw open the door, and he stumbled inside, snow-covered and breathing hard. "What happened?" "Hunters. 3 of them." He set the rifle down and started pulling off his coat. "They're setting up camp on the South Ridge, looking for something." "For you?" "Probably." He moved to the fire, holding his hands out to the warmth. "Word must have gotten out that I'm still alive up here. Someone always wants revenge." "What are we going to do?" "We wait. See if they leave on their own." He glanced at her. "If they don't, we deal with it." "Deal with it how?" "However we have to." The flatness in his voice was absolute, final. Brina sat down heavily at the table. "You're going to kill them. If they come here, yes." He said it like it was obvious, like it was the only possible answer. "There has to be another way." "There isn't." Kyle turned to face her fully. "You need to understand something, Brina. I've been up here 5 years, 5 years of peace. I've had that because people think I'm dead or too dangerous to bother. If these hunters go back and report that I'm alive, that I'm vulnerable, more will come. And more after that. It won't stop. So you'll kill them to keep your secret." "I'll kill them to keep us alive." His eyes bored into hers. "You think they'll just leave you alone if they find you here? You're evidence. You're a witness. They'll take you back to Verdun, drag you in front of whatever authority sent them, make you testify. And then what? You think Marta Fenwick will take you back? You think anyone down there gives a shit what happens to you?" Brina wanted to argue, wanted to say he was wrong, but she couldn't, because he wasn't wrong. "I don't want people to die," she said quietly. "Neither do I." Kale's voice softened slightly. But wanting doesn't change what is. Those men made a choice when they came up here. Now they'll live with the consequences. He moved to the window and looked out again, scanning the ridgeline. Get some sleep, he said without turning around. Tomorrow might be difficult. But Brina couldn't sleep. She lay in the loft, staring at the ceiling, listening to Kyle pace downstairs, listening to him check and recheck the rifle, listening to him prepare for violence with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done it before. She thought about the stories. About the butcher of Frost Peak who'd killed 6 hunters and wore their bones as warnings. She'd stopped believing those stories weeks ago. Now she wondered if maybe she'd stopped too soon. Morning came gray and cold, with clouds pressing down on the mountain like a weight. Kyle was already dressed, already armed, when Brina climbed down from the loft. They're moving, he said. Coming this way. Probably found our tracks from yesterday. How long? Hour. Maybe 2. He handed her a knife, a hunting knife with a blade as long as her hand. Know how to use this? Not really. Point end goes into bad guys. Try not to stab yourself. He moved to the door. Stay inside. Don't come out unless I call for you. Kale, wait! But he was already gone, disappearing into the gray morning like a ghost. Brina stood at the window, knife clutched in sweating hands, and watched the ridgeline. She saw them 30 minutes later. 3 shapes moving through the snow, rifles slung across their backs. They moved cautiously, spreading out as they approached the cabin, looking for threats, looking for Kyle. They had no idea he was already behind them. Brina saw him rise from the snow like something conjured 20 feet behind the last hunter, saw the rifle come up, saw the hunter drop without a sound. The other 2 spun around, shouting, bringing their own rifles to bear. Too late. Kyle fired twice more, and both men fell. It was over in seconds. Quiet. Efficient. Brutal. Brina's hands shook so hard she almost dropped the knife. Kale stood in the snow for a long moment, rifle still raised, making sure they were dead. Then he walked to each body in turn, checking for signs of life, finding none. He looked toward the cabin, and even from this distance, Brina could see the deadness in his eyes. The monster was real, after all. She opened the door when he returned, and he walked past her without a word, setting the rifle back in its place above the door. Are they dead? Stupid question. She'd seen them fall. Yes. Did you have to? Yes. He turned to face her. You want to know what they were carrying? Orders. Written orders from the Verdun Town Council authorizing them to apprehend or kill the criminal Kyle Draven, and anyone aiding him. That means you, Brina. They would have taken you back in chains. He pulled a folded paper from his coat and tossed it on the table. Brina read it, her stomach sinking with every word. He was right. The orders were explicit. Bring back Draven dead or alive, and detain any accomplices for questioning. What are you going to do with the bodies? She asked. Burn them, scatter the ashes, erase any evidence they were here. He moved to the fire and held his hands out to the warmth. Same thing I did with the others 5 years ago. You really did kill them all. I really did. He looked at her. Still want to stay? It was a genuine question, not a threat. He was giving her a choice. Brina looked at the orders on the table, looked at the rifle above the door, looked at Kyle, standing by the fire with blood on his hands and grief in his eyes. Yes, she said. I still want to stay. Because where else would she go? Kyle nodded slowly. Then help me carry them to the fire pit. They won't burn themselves. It was the most horrible thing Brina had ever done. They dragged the bodies one by one to a pit Kyle had dug behind the cabin for burning refuse, and piled them with enough wood to reduce bone to ash. The smell was ungodly, and Brina vomited twice before her stomach had nothing left to give. Kyle worked in silence, his face blank, and Brina realized this was how he survived. By shutting down, by becoming something cold and mechanical that could do what needed doing without feeling it. It took all day for the bodies to burn completely. By the time they finished scattering the ashes in the wind, the sun was setting and Brina felt like she'd aged a decade. They walked back to the cabin without speaking. That night, Kyle didn't come down for dinner. He stayed in the loft, and Brina could hear him through the curtain, not crying, but breathing hard, like he was fighting something inside himself. She wanted to go to him, to say something, but she didn't know what. So she ate alone and later climbed to her own pallet and lay there listening to him struggle with demons she couldn't see. And she realized something that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid for him. There was a difference. The silence between them lasted 2 days. Cale moved through the cabin like a ghost, doing what needed doing, banking fires, checking traps, hauling water. But he didn't speak, didn't look at her, just existed in the same space, separated by something Brina couldn't name. She gave him room, worked on her own tasks, split wood until her shoulders screamed, hauled water until her hands cramped, kept herself busy so she wouldn't have to think about the bodies burning or the smell of ash that still clung to her clothes, no matter how many times she changed. On the 3rd day, she found him standing at the edge of the plateau, staring down into the valleys below. The wind whipped his hair around his face, and he didn't move when she approached. "You haven't eaten," Brina said. "Not hungry. You need to eat. I need a lot of things." His voice was flat, dead. "Food isn't top of the list." Brina stood beside him, following his gaze. From up here, the world below looked impossibly small, distant, like something from a dream. "How many have you killed?" she asked, not because she wanted to know, but because someone needed to ask. Someone needed to acknowledge what he'd done. 9. He said it without hesitation. 6 hunters 5 years ago. 3 more 2 days ago. 9 people who came up here thinking they could take me back. 9 people who were wrong. Does it get easier? No. He turned to look at her, and his eyes were red-rimmed. It gets worse. Every single time. Then why do it? Because the alternative is letting them win. Letting them drag me back to face punishment for saving my sister, for refusing to let a rich bastard beat her to death and call it marriage. His hands clenched into fists. "I won't go back, Brina. I'll die first. I'll kill 100 men first." "I believe you. You should be afraid of me." "I was," Brina admitted. "At first, when Garrett and Finn told me who you were, I thought I was going to die. Thought you'd—" She stopped, not wanting to say it out loud. "Thought I'd hurt you." Cale's jaw tightened. "Everyone thinks that. The monster in the mountains. The killer. The butcher of Frost Peak. But you're not a monster." "Yes, I am." He turned back to the valley. "I just happen to be your monster. That's the only difference." Brina wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he was wrong, but she'd seen him kill 3 men without hesitation, had helped him burn the bodies and scatter the ashes like they'd never existed. Maybe he was right. Maybe they were both monsters now. "I made stew," she said finally. "You should eat." "Brina, please." She met his eyes. "You taught me to survive. Let me return the favor." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough. "All right," he said. "All right." They walked back to the cabin together, and that night Kyle ate his first real meal in 3 days. They didn't talk about the hunters or the bodies, or what it meant that Brina had chosen to stay. They just ate, and later they read from the medical textbook until the fire burned low, and it felt almost normal. Almost. Winter settled in with a vengeance after that. The storms came harder and more frequent, pinning them inside for days at a time. Snow piled up until Brina couldn't see out the windows, until the world became just the cabin and the fire and the endless howling wind. Cale taught her to play chess using pieces he'd carved from wood years ago. She was terrible at it, losing every game, but he was patient in a way that surprised her. "You're thinking too small," he said, moving his knight. "Chess isn't about the next move. It's about 3 moves from now. 4. You have to see the whole board. I can barely see 2 moves ahead." "Then practice." He captured her bishop. "You've got nothing but time up here." She got better slowly. Started winning the occasional game, started seeing patterns she'd missed before. "You learn fast," Kyle observed one night, studying the board. She'd just put him in check for the first time ever. "Faster than I expected." "Had a good teacher?" Brina moved her rook. "Check again." He laughed, actually laughed, a sound she'd heard maybe twice since arriving, and conceded the game. "You're dangerous," he said, resetting the pieces. "Another month, and you'll be beating me regularly." "That's the plan." They played until past midnight, and when Brina finally climbed to the loft, she realized she was smiling. Actually smiling, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Something was changing between them, something she didn't have a name for yet, but it felt like trust. 6 weeks in, Brina woke to find KL gone, and a note on the table. Checking the far trap line. Back by nightfall. Don't burn the cabin down. She smiled at that last part and set about her morning routine. Hauled water, stocked wood, made breakfast and ate it alone, staring out at the white expanse of snow. The silence was different now. Not oppressive, just peaceful. She'd gotten used to the isolation, to the way time moved differently up here. Days blurred together, marked only by the tasks that needed doing and the slow wheel of the sun across the sky. She was cleaning the breakfast dishes when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Metal on stone. Voices. Brina froze, water dripping from her hands. More voices. Getting closer. She moved to the window and peered through the gap in the shutters. At first she saw nothing but snow and rocks. Then movement caught her eye, figures climbing the slope toward the cabin. 5 of them, all armed, all moving with the confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going. Panic seized her throat. Kale was gone. The rifle was above the door, but she'd never fired it. The knife was in her belt, but what good was a knife against 5 armed men? She had maybe 2 minutes before they reached the door. Think! She ran to the ladder and climbed to the loft, pulling up behind her and dropping the hatch closed. It wasn't much of a hiding spot, but it was all she had. She pressed herself into the far corner, knife clutched in shaking hands, and waited. The knock came hard and loud. "Open up! Verdant Authority!" Brina held her breath. Another knock, harder. "We know someone's here! We saw the smoke!" Silence. Then the sound of the door being tested. The bar held, but barely. "Break it down," a woman's voice ordered. A voice Brina knew. Marta Fenwick. The door shattered inward with a crash that shook the whole cabin. Brina heard boots on the floor below, heard them spreading out to search. "Nobody here," a man said. "Check the loft," Marta ordered. Footsteps on the ladder, the hatch opening. A face appearing, young guy, maybe 25, with a crossbow in his hands. His eyes found Brina in her corner. "Got her," he called down. "Bring her." The man climbed into the loft, crossbow aimed at Brina's chest. "Come on, don't make this difficult." "I'm not going back," Brina said. Her voice shook but held. Wasn't a request. He grabbed her arm, and she reacted without thinking, drove the knife up into his thigh. He screamed and fell backward, tumbling through the hatch to crash on the floor below. Chaos erupted, shouting. Someone fired a crossbow bolt up through the opening, missing Brina by inches. "Get up here and grab her," Marta's voice, sharp with fury. 2 more men came up the ladder, and Brina fought like something wild. She got one across the face with the knife, opened up his cheek, but there were too many of them. They dragged her down, thrashing and screaming, and threw her to the floor in front of Marta Fenwick. Marta looked older than Brina remembered. Harder. Her face was a map of anger and bitter lines, and her eyes held nothing but contempt. "Hello, Brina," she said. "Miss me? Go to hell." Marta kicked her in the ribs, and Brina curled around the pain. "Where's Draven?" Marta demanded. "Don't know." Another kick. "Where is he?" "I said I don't know." Brina spat blood. "He left this morning." "Then we wait." Marta gestured to her men. "Tie her up. When he comes back, we take them both." They bound Brina's hands behind her back and shoved her into one of the chairs. The man she'd stabbed sat against the wall, pressing cloth to his bleeding thigh and glaring at her with murder in his eyes. "Should let me kill her," he muttered. "You'll get your chance," Marta said, "after we have Draven." "Why are you doing this?" Brina asked. "You sold me. You got your money. Why come after me?" Marta smiled, and it was the cruelest thing Brina had ever seen. Because the Verdant Council offered a reward, 500 silver for Draven, dead or alive, and 50 silver for anyone who helped him. She leaned close. "You're worth money to me, girl. You've always been worth money. Just took me a while to figure out how much." "You're going to get yourself killed." "By Draven?" Marta laughed. "He's 1 man. We're 5. The odds are in our favor. You don't know him." "I know he bleeds." Marta straightened. "Everyone bleeds." They settled in to wait. and Brina's mind raced through options. Kale would come back eventually, would walk right into this trap. 5 against 1, and they'd be ready for him. He'd die, and it would be her fault for not being more careful, for not seeing them coming, unless she warned him first. She tested the ropes binding her wrists, tight but not impossible. If she could work them loose, if she could get to the door. One of Marta's men settled into a chair across from her, crossbow resting on his lap. "Don't even think about it," he said. "First sign of trouble, you get a bolt through the heart." So much for that plan. The hours crawled past. Marta's people searched the cabin, taking inventory of supplies, pocketing anything valuable. One of them found Kael's medical textbook and tossed it in the fire, laughing as the pages curled and burned. Brina felt rage surge through her veins, hot and wild. "That was his mother's," she said quietly. The man who'd burned it shrugged. "Dead woman doesn't need books." "You're going to regret that." "Am I?" He leaned close. "What's a tied-up girl going to do about it?" Brina headbutted him. His nose crunched, blood spraying, and he stumbled backward, cursing. The man with the crossbow stood up, weapon raised. "Sit down," Marta ordered. "Don't waste bolts. We need her conscious to draw Draven in." The man with the broken nose wiped blood from his face and glared at Brina with pure hatred. "When this is over, I'm going to make you suffer." "Get in line," Brina replied. Marta pulled the bleeding man aside and spoke to him in low tones. Brina couldn't hear the words, but she saw the man's face change, saw anticipation replace anger. Whatever Marta had promised him, it wasn't good. The sun was setting when they heard footsteps outside. Everyone tensed. The man with the crossbow moved to the door, pressing himself against the wall. 2 others took positions flanking the entrance. Marta grabbed Brina by the hair and pulled her to her feet, holding a knife to her throat. "One sound and you die before he clears the doorway," Marta whispered. The door opened and Kael walked in carrying a brace of rabbits. He saw Brina immediately, saw the knife at her throat, saw the armed men spreading out to surround him. He didn't panic, didn't even look surprised, just set down the rabbit slowly and raised his hands. "Marta Fenwick," he said calmly, "wasn't expecting you." "Should have been." Marta pressed the knife harder against Brina's skin. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Kael looked at Brina, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, saw him measuring angles and distances and odds. "Don't," Brina said. "There's too many." "Listen to your whore," Marta sneered. "Be smart for once." Kael's expression didn't change, but something went cold in his eyes. "Let her go, and I'll cooperate." "You'll cooperate anyway, or I cut her throat right now." Marta drew the knife across Brina's skin just enough to draw blood. "On your knees." Kael knelt, placing his hands behind his head. 2 of Marta's men moved in with ropes, binding his wrists and ankles. They weren't gentle about it, jerking the ropes tight enough to cut circulation. "Good," Marta said, shoving Brina back into her chair. "Now we can do this civilized." "Civilized," Kael repeated. "That what you call invading someone's home?" "I call it justice." Marta walked a circle around him. "You're wanted for murder, Draven, multiple murders. The Verdun Council wants you back to face trial." "There won't be a trial. They'll hang me the day we arrive." "Probably," Marta shrugged. "Not my problem. I'm just the delivery service." "How much are they paying you?" "Enough." She stopped in front of him. "But here's the thing. The reward is the same dead or alive. So I'm going to give you a choice. You can walk down that mountain with us tomorrow, bound and humiliated, and hang in Verdun Square in front of everyone. Or you can die here, quick and quiet, and we carry your body down. Either way, I get paid." Kyle was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's a third option." "Which is?" "You leave. Right now. Take your people and go. I let you live." Marta laughed. "You're not in a position to let anyone do anything." "No?" Kael looked at her, and his eyes were dead again. Flat. Empty. "You really think 5 people is enough? It's 5 against 1. I've survived worse odds. You're tied up and on your knees. For now." He smiled, and it was the coldest thing Brina had ever seen. "But rope breaks, knots loosen. And when that happens, I'm going to kill you, all of you. Just like I killed the last 9 who tried this. 9? Marta's smile faltered slightly. 6 hunters 5 years ago. 3 more 6 weeks ago. You'll be numbers 10 through 14. Hell, I'll even bury you together. Save time. One of Marta's men shifted nervously. Boss, maybe we should... Shut up, Marta snapped. He's bluffing. Am I? Kyle asked. Ask yourself why no one's come back from this mountain, Marta. Ask yourself what happened to all those hunters the council sent. You really think they just gave up and went home? The cabin fell silent except for the fire crackling. You're a coward, Marta said finally, hiding up here, running from your crimes. I'm a survivor. Kale's voice was soft, deadly. There's a difference. Marta pulled out a club from her belt, heavy wood reinforced with metal, and swung it into Kale's ribs. He grunted, but didn't cry out. She hit him again. Harder. Stop it! Brina screamed, straining against her ropes. Marta hit him a third time, and this time Kale coughed blood. That's for making me climb a mountain in winter, Marta said. She raised the club again. The door exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. Like something massive had hit it from outside. Everyone spun toward the sound, weapons coming up. Nothing was there. Just darkness and wind and snow blowing in. Close it, Marta ordered. The nearest man moved to the door and stopped cold. Boss, you need to see this. They crowded around the doorway, and Brina saw their faces change, saw fear replace confidence. What is it? Marta demanded, pushing forward. She looked outside and went very still. Brina craned her neck but couldn't see from her angle. What's out there? No one answered. Then a shape filled the doorway, massive and dark and smelling like musk and rage. A bear. Not just any bear. A mountain bear, 8 feet tall on its hind legs, with claws like knives and eyes that reflected the firelight. It roared, and the sound rattled Brina's teeth. Marta's people scattered. One fired a crossbow bolt that embedded in the bear's shoulder. It didn't even slow down. The bear swiped at the closest man and sent him flying across the cabin to crash into the wall. He didn't get up. Chaos. Someone was screaming. Someone else was trying to reload their crossbow with shaking hands. The man with the broken nose ran for the window and threw himself through it, shattering shutters and glass. The bear went after Marta, who dropped her club and was backing toward the fireplace. She grabbed a burning log and swung it like a weapon. The bear didn't care. It lunged, and Marta's scream cut off with horrible finality. Brina squeezed her eyes shut, but she couldn't block out the sounds, couldn't unhear the wet tearing noises or the crack of breaking bones. When she opened her eyes again, 3 of Marta's people were dead. One was unconscious against the wall. The last one, the man with the crossbow, was frozen in place, weapon aimed at the bear, but too terrified to fire. The bear turned toward him, blood dripping from its muzzle. Shoot it! Brina screamed. The bolt flew, hit the bear in the chest. The bear roared again and charged. The man tried to run. Didn't make it 3 steps. Then there was just silence, just the bear and the bodies and the fire still burning like nothing had happened. The bear turned toward Brina, and she stopped breathing. This was it. This was how she died. The bear took a step toward her. Another. Easy, Kyle's voice said from the floor. Easy, girl, not her. The bear stopped, turned its massive head toward Kyle, and something impossible happened. The bear walked over to Kyle and nuzzled against his shoulder, making a sound almost like a purr. Good girl, Kyle whispered. Thank you. Brina stared. What the hell? Her name's Sable, Kyle said, somehow managing to sound calm despite the blood on his face and the bodies scattered around the cabin. She's been living in the cave network under the plateau for 3 years. We have an arrangement. An arrangement. I leave her meat scraps. She keeps wolves away from the cabin. He looked at the bear. And apparently she breaks down doors when I'm in trouble. Sable made that purring sound again and used her massive claws to snap the ropes binding Kyle's wrists. He stood slowly, wincing from the beating Marta had given him. Then he moved to Brina and cut her ropes with the knife Marta had dropped. Are you hurt? He asked. I'm fine. You're the one coughing blood. Broken rib. Maybe 2. He steadied himself against the table. I'll live. Sable lumbered around the cabin, sniffing at the bodies. She grabbed one and started dragging it toward the door. She's taking them? Brina asked. She's cleaning up. Bears are practical like that. Kael watched as Sable disappeared outside with her prize. She'll eat what she wants and leave the rest for scavengers. By morning, there won't be evidence anyone was here. Brina looked at the blood splattered across the walls, the shattered door, the overturned furniture. Except for all this. That we can fix. Kael moved to the fireplace and started banking the flames. Help me. We need to clean this before it freezes. They worked through the night, scrubbed blood from floorboards and walls, gathered the shattered door and used it for firewood, straightened furniture, and swept up broken glass. Sable came back twice more for bodies, and each time Brina had to fight the urge to run screaming. How long have you known about her? Brina asked as they worked. Since the first winter. She was injured, caught in a trap someone had left. I freed her and patched her up. He wrung out a bloody rag. She's been around ever since. Usually keeps her distance, but I guess she heard the fight. She saved our lives. She saved mine, Kael corrected. You she probably would have eaten. That's not funny. Wasn't meant to be. But the corner of his mouth twitched. By the time the sun rose, the cabin looked almost normal again. No bodies, no blood, just a broken door that they'd have to repair and the lingering smell of death that would take days to fade. Kael sat at the table holding his ribs and breathing carefully. Brina made tea and brought it to him. Drink, she ordered. He drank. Thank you, he said after a moment, for fighting, for warning me even though you couldn't. How did you know something was wrong? Sable. She was agitated when I came back, kept looking toward the cabin and growling, knew something was off. He set down the cup. Should have been more careful. Should have expected Marta to come after the reward. It's not your fault, isn't it? He looked at her. How many more, Brina? How many more times will people come up here trying to kill me, trying to drag me back? I don't know. Neither do I. He stood, wincing. But I'm tired of killing, tired of looking over my shoulder, tired of living like this. Then what do? We stop running. He moved to the window and stared out at the mountains. We stop hiding. We go down there and face them. Are you insane? They'll hang you. Maybe, maybe not. He turned back to her. But I'm done being the monster in the mountains. I'm done letting them control my life with fear. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die on my terms, not theirs. Brina's heart hammered. When? Spring. When the pass is clear. His eyes met hers. You don't have to come. This isn't your fight. Yes, it is. She moved to stand beside him. You saved my life, taught me to survive, gave me a home when I had nothing. This is absolutely my fight. You could die. I could die up here too. At least down there it'll mean something. Kael studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, we go together. We go together, Brina agreed. Outside, Sable roared, a sound that echoed across the mountains and made the cabin shake. Inside, two survivors made plans to stop running and start fighting back. The winter had changed them both. Spring would change everything else. The snow started melting in early March, turning the mountain into a maze of slush and mud and streams that hadn't existed a week before. Kael's ribs healed slowly, leaving him with a limp and a wheeze that wouldn't go away. Brina caught him awake most nights, sitting at the table with a hand pressed to his side, breathing through pain he wouldn't acknowledge in daylight. You need rest, she told him one morning after finding him already up, already working despite the gray exhaustion stamped across his face. I'll rest when we're done. He was packing supplies into canvas bags, dried meat, hardtack, the medical kit his mother had left him. We leave in 2 weeks. Need to be ready. 2 weeks isn't enough time for you to heal. 2 weeks is what we have. He didn't look at her. Passes will be clear by then. Any later and we risk running into early traders. Can't have witnesses. Brina wanted to argue but knew it was pointless. Kael had made his decision, and once he decided something, he was immovable as the mountains themselves. So she helped him pack, sorted through their supplies, deciding what was essential and what could be left behind. They'd need to travel light. The descent would take 3 days minimum, maybe 4 depending on conditions, and they couldn't afford to be slowed down by excess weight. What's the plan when we get there? Brina asked, rolling spare clothes into tight bundles. Walk into Verdun and announce ourselves? Something like that. Kale was checking the rifle, making sure the mechanism still worked after months of disuse. We go straight to the council hall, demand a public hearing. They'll arrest you the second you walk through the door. Probably. He set down the rifle. But they'll have to do it in front of witnesses, in front of the whole town, and that's when you speak. Brina stopped packing. Me? You. Kale turned to face her. You tell them what Marta did, how she sold you to me, how the council authorized hunters to kill anyone helping me. No trial, no evidence. You make them look at what they've become. You think they'll care? I think some of them will. His jaw was set. Not everyone in Verdun is corrupt. There are good people there, people who remember what justice is supposed to look like. We just need to reach them. And if we can't, then we die trying. He said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather. Better than dying up here with nothing to show for it. Brina looked at the bags they were packing, at the cabin that had become her home, at the man who'd saved her life by buying it and then giving it back piece by piece. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. Kale moved to the window, staring out at the melting snow. But don't let it stop you. Fear that stops you is just another kind of prison. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Kale drilled Brina on what to say, how to say it, which details mattered and which would just muddy the water. He made her practice in front of him until she could recite the whole story without stumbling. Remember, he said during one of these sessions, they're going to try to discredit you, call you a liar, say you're just helping me to save yourself. Don't get angry, don't get defensive, just stick to the facts. What if the facts aren't enough? Then we improvise. He leaned back in his chair. But facts are usually enough. People can ignore a lot of things, but they can't ignore the truth if you shove it in their faces hard enough. Brina hoped he was right. Hoped that the truth mattered to someone down there, because if it didn't, they were walking into a death sentence. The night before they left, Brina couldn't sleep. She lay in the loft listening to Kael's breathing on the other side of the curtain, listening to the wind that still howled even though spring was supposedly here. You awake? She asked into the darkness. Yeah. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Silence. Then, I think we're doing the only thing. That's not the same as right, but it's what we've got. I don't want you to die. I don't want me to die either. A pause. But if I do, you run. Don't try to save me. Don't stick around. Just run and don't look back. I'm not leaving you. Brina, I said I'm not leaving you. She rolled over to face the curtain, even though she couldn't see through it. We go together or we don't go at all. That was the deal. She heard him sigh, heard the creak of his pallet as he shifted position. You're stubborn, he said. Learned from the best. That got a quiet laugh out of him. Fair enough. They lay in silence after that, and eventually Brina drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of courtrooms and nooses and crowds calling for blood. She woke to Kael shaking her shoulder. Time to go. The sun was barely up, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Brina dressed quickly and climbed down to find their packs ready by the door. Kael was already wearing his, rifle slung across his back. Eat something, he ordered, nodding toward the table where he'd laid out bread and dried meat. They ate in silence, both of them focused on what lay ahead. When they finished, Kael stood and moved to the door. Last chance to change your mind, he said. Not changing my mind. Then let's go. They stepped outside into morning air that smelled like wet earth and pine. The plateau was covered in patches of snow and mud, and water dripped from the cabin's eaves like rain. Sable was waiting at the edge of the clearing, sitting on her haunches like an enormous dog. She'd been coming around more often since the night of Marta's attack, like she'd decided they needed watching. Kael approached her and put a hand on her massive head. You're in charge while we're gone. Keep the wolves away from the stores. Sable made that purring sound and nuzzled against his chest. We'll be back, Kael told her. One way or another. They started down the mountain as the sun cleared the horizon. The trail was worse than Brina remembered. What had been solid footing in winter was now slick mud and loose scree. Twice she slipped and would have fallen if Kael hadn't caught her. His ribs were clearly bothering him. She could see it in the way he moved, the careful way he breathed, but he didn't complain. They walked until midday, then stopped to rest and eat. Kyle unfolded a map he'd drawn from memory, showing the route down. "We're here," he said, pointing to a mark on the paper. "Another 6 hours to the first way station. We'll camp there tonight, hit Northridge tomorrow evening." "Northridge? I thought we were going to Verdun." "We are, but Northridge is where I grew up, where my sister is buried." He folded the map. "I need to see her grave before we face the council. Need to remember why I'm doing this." Brina nodded. She understood that kind of need, the need to touch something real before walking into the unknown. They reached the way station as the sun was setting. It was just a stone shelter built into the mountainside, barely big enough for 2 people, but it had a fire pit and protection from the wind. Kyle built a fire while Brina unpacked their bedrolls. They ate cold food, didn't want the smoke from cooking to draw attention, and settled in for the night. "Tell me about your sister," Brina said as they sat watching the flames. Kale was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Her name was Elena, 3 years younger than me, smart, funny, too trusting." "How did she meet him, the man who killed her?" "He came to Northridge for business. Rich family from Verdun, lots of connections. Elena worked at the inn where he stayed. He courted her properly at first. Flowers, gifts, pretty words. By the time I realized what he was, she was already in love. You tried to warn her. I tried everything, but she thought I was just being overprotective. Thought I didn't want her to be happy." His hands clenched. "She married him 6 months after they met. Moved to Verdun. I didn't see her for almost a year." "What changed?" "She showed up at my door one night, face so swollen I barely recognized her. Said she'd made a mistake. Said he'd been hurting her for months and she couldn't take it anymore." Kale's voice went flat. "I took her to the authorities. They laughed us out of the building. Said it was a domestic matter. Said she should try being a better wife." Brina's stomach turned. "So you killed him?" "I waited, watched, followed him for 3 weeks. And then one night when he was walking home drunk from a tavern, I stepped out of an alley and put a knife in his heart." He looked at her. "Elena tried to stop me from doing it, begged me not to. But I couldn't let him keep breathing. Couldn't let him walk around thinking he could do that and face no consequences." "Did she understand? After?" "She tried to, but the guilt ate at her. She thought it was her fault that I'd become a murderer, that I'd destroyed my life for her." His voice cracked. "She hung herself 2 months later. Left a note saying she was sorry, that she'd caused enough damage." Tears streaked down Brina's face. "It wasn't her fault. I know that, you know that, but she couldn't see it." Kale wiped at his eyes roughly. "And then the hunters came. His family wanted justice, wanted blood. I ran to the mountains because it was run or hang, and I couldn't face a noose knowing Elena died thinking she'd ruined me." "But you did ruin yourself, in a way?" "Yeah." He stared into the fire. "Yeah, I did." They sat in silence after that, letting the fire burn down to coals. Eventually they rolled into their bedrolls, lying close together for warmth in the small shelter. "Kyle?" Brina said into the darkness. "What?" "Tomorrow, when we see her grave. Thank you for letting me come with you." His hand found hers in the dark and squeezed once. "Thank you for wanting to." They reached Northridge late the next afternoon. The village was smaller than Brina expected. Maybe 200 people, most of them loggers or farmers. The main street was mud and wooden planks, lined with buildings that had seen better decades. Kyle kept his head down as they walked through, but people recognized him anyway. She saw it in the way eyes widened, the way conversation stopped mid-sentence. "Is that? Can't be. He's dead. Look at his face. That's Kyle Draven." They reached the graveyard on the village's edge just as the sun was setting. Kyle led her to a plot in the back corner, marked with a simple wooden cross and a name carved into stone. Elena Draven, beloved daughter and sister. Kale knelt in the mud beside the grave, and Brina gave him space. She stood a few feet back and watched as he laid a hand on the marker. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry I made everything worse. Sorry you died thinking you'd failed me when I was the one who failed you." The words broke something in Brina's chest. She moved to kneel beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder. She knew you loved her, Brina said. That's what mattered. Is it? Kael looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. Because love didn't keep her alive. Love didn't stop the rope. Love is why you're still fighting, why we're going to Verdun tomorrow. That has to count for something. He leaned into her just for a moment, letting her support his weight. Then he stood, pulling himself together with visible effort. We should go. There's an inn on the North Road. We can get a room, hot food, be ready for tomorrow. They walked back through the village as darkness fell. More stairs, more whispers, but nobody tried to stop them. The inn was called the Timber Rest, and it was warmer and cleaner than the Iron Bell had ever been. The innkeeper was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a bun. 2 rooms? She asked when they approached the counter. One's fine, Kael said. 2 beds. The woman's eyes sharpened, recognition dawning. Kael? Kael Draven? Yeah. Everyone said you were dead. I got better. He set coins on the counter, silver he'd been saving for years. We just need 1 night. We'll be gone by morning. The woman looked at Brina, then back at Kael. Whatever she saw in their faces made her decision. Room 4, top of the stairs. She pushed the coins back toward him. No charge. Elena was a friend of mine. She'd want me to help you. Kael's throat worked. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just be careful. The council's been looking for you for years. They hear you're in the area. They'll send soldiers. Let them send soldiers. Kael picked up their packs. We're not hiding anymore. The room was small but clean, with 2 narrow beds and a window overlooking the street. Brina collapsed onto one of the beds and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow we reach Verdun, she said. Tomorrow we reach Verdun, Kael agreed. He sat on the other bed, pulling off his boots. You remember what to say? I remember. Don't let them intimidate you. Don't let them twist your words. I know, Kael. And if things go bad, they won't. But if they do, then we deal with it together. Brina turned her head to look at him. Stop trying to prepare me for your death. It's not happening. He smiled slightly. You're very confident for someone who's never been in a fight she couldn't lose. I learned from the best, she repeated. They slept fitfully, both of them too aware of what waited in the morning. Brina woke before dawn to find Kael already dressed, standing at the window and watching the street below. They're coming, he said quietly. Brina joined him at the window. 6 soldiers in Verdun colors were marching down the street, heading straight for the inn. How did they know? Someone talked, probably half the village by now. He turned from the window and grabbed the rifle. Get your things, we're leaving. They're at the front door. Then we go out the back. He threw open the window. Come on. They climbed out onto the inn's roof, then dropped to the alley below. Brina's ankle twisted when she landed, pain shooting up her leg, but Kael hauled her upright and they ran. Behind them, shouts. There! The alley! They ran through Northridge as the sun rose, zigzagging between buildings, jumping fences, splashing through a stream that ran behind the smithy. The soldiers followed, slower but relentless. This way! Kael pulled her into a barn and up a ladder to the hayloft. Be quiet. They pressed themselves into the hay, breathing hard, as the soldiers thundered past below. Split up, the leader ordered. Check every building. They waited in the hay for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, the voices faded, moving toward the other end of the village. Now what? Brina whispered. We go to Verdun on foot. Stay off the road. Kael peered through a gap in the boards. It's 10 miles. We can make it by afternoon if we move fast. They climbed down from the loft and slipped out of the barn. The village was crawling with soldiers now. They'd clearly sent for reinforcements. Kael led Brina through a maze of back paths and gardens, always moving, always one step ahead. They reached the tree line on the village's edge and plunged into the forest. Behind them, someone shouted, They're heading for the woods! Run! Kael ordered. They ran. The forest was dense and tangled, full of deadfalls and thorns that tore at their clothes. Brina's ankle screamed with every step, but she forced herself to keep moving. Behind them, the soldiers were crashing through the undergrowth, getting closer. Keep going! Kael stopped and unslung his rifle. I'll slow them down. No, we stay together. Brina! A gunshot cracked through the trees, not from Kael's rifle, from behind them. They both dove for cover as more shots rang out. Kael fired back twice, and one of the soldiers screamed, "Move!" He grabbed Brina's arm, and they were running again, bullets chewing up the bark around them. They broke from the trees onto a road, the main road to Verdun. A merchant's wagon was approaching, loaded with barrels. "Stop!" Kael stepped into the road, rifle raised. "Stop the wagon!" The merchant pulled on the reins, eyes wide. "What? We need a ride to Verdun, now!" "I'm not—" Kael fired a shot into the air. "Now!" The merchant's hands went up. All right, get in the back." They scrambled into the wagon bed, hiding among the barrels as the merchant whipped the horses forward. Behind them, the soldiers burst from the tree line, but they were too late. The wagon was already pulling away. "You people are going to get me killed," the merchant muttered. "Just drive," Kael said. "You'll be compensated." "With what? You look like you've got nothing but the clothes on your back." "With the truth." Kael leaned back against a barrel, breathing hard. "When this is over, you'll be able to say you helped bring down the Verdun Council." "That's not worth coin." "It's worth something," Brina said. "It has to be." The merchant grumbled, but kept driving. They rode for 3 hours, jouncing over ruts and potholes, always aware that soldiers could be following. Finally, the merchant called back, "Verdun ahead. Where do you want off?" "Council Hall," Kael said. "Main entrance." "Are you insane? That's the first place they'll look." "That's the point." Kael checked his rifle. "We're not sneaking in. We're walking through the front door." The merchant let them off 2 blocks from the council hall and fled without looking back. Kael and Brina stood in the street, covered in mud and blood and hay, while townspeople stared. "Ready?" Kael asked. Brina's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs, but she nodded. "Ready." They walked to the council hall side by side, and with every step the crowd behind them grew. Word spread fast in Verdun. The butcher of Frost Peak was back. The murderer who'd escaped justice. The monster from the mountains. By the time they reached the steps of the council hall, 200 people were following them. The guards at the door lowered their spears. "Halt! You're under arrest!" "We're here for a public hearing," Kael announced, his voice carrying across the square. "By Verdun law, any citizen can demand one. I'm demanding." "You're not a citizen. You're a criminal." "Then arrest me in front of everyone. Let them see what you're so afraid of." The crowd murmured. Some people looked angry, but others looked curious, like maybe they wanted to hear what the monster had to say. The council hall doors opened, and a man in official robes stepped out. Council leader Marcus Venn, his face carved from granite and just as warm. "Kael Draven," he said, "you have a lot of nerve showing your face here." "I have a lot to say." Kael lowered his rifle and set it on the ground, a gesture of peace. "Give me 1 hour. Let me speak. If after that you still want me dead, I'll go to the gallows willingly." Ben's eyes narrowed. "Why should we give you anything?" "Because the truth matters." Kael gestured to the crowd. "Or are you afraid of what I might say?" The crowd was growing. 300 people now, maybe more, all watching, all waiting. Venn looked at them, then back at Kael, making calculations. 1 hour, he said finally, "but you speak in chains, and if you try anything, we won't." Kael held out his wrists. "Put me in irons if it makes you feel better. Just let me speak." The guards moved forward with shackles. They locked Kael's wrists and ankles, then pushed him up the steps. Brina followed, her heart in her throat, as they entered the council hall. Inside, the chamber was packed. Council members sat at a raised dais, and behind them, armed guards lined the walls. This was no hearing. This was an execution waiting for an excuse. But the crowd had followed them inside. Hundreds of people squeezing into the public gallery, climbing on benches, pressing against the walls. They would have their witnesses. Venn took his seat at the center of the dais. "Kael Draven, you stand accused of murder, multiple counts. How do you plead?" "Guilty," Kael said, and the room erupted. Venn slammed his gavel. "Order, order!" When the noise died down, Kael continued. "I killed Marcus Torin 5 years ago, put a knife in his heart in a Verdun alley, and I'd do it again." "You admit to murder in open court." "I admit to justice, because your court wouldn't give it." Kael's voice rang out clear and strong. Marcus Torrin beat my sister, beat her so badly she couldn't walk. And when I brought her to you, to this council, you told me it was a domestic matter. Told her to be a better wife. That's not... She hung herself 2 months later. Kyle's shout echoed off the stone walls. My sister died because you wouldn't protect her, because money and connections matter more than justice in this city. The crowd was silent now, watching. Ven's face had gone red. That's slander. That's truth, and you know it. Kale turned to face the gallery. How many of you have seen this? Have watched the council ignore crimes because the criminal had the right name, the right family? Murmurs ran through the crowd. The Torrin family demanded my death, Kale continued. Not a trial, not justice, just death. So I ran, lived in the mountains for 5 years. And you know what? I found peace there. Found a life where power didn't mean you could hurt people without consequences. He gestured to Brina. And then you sent hunters after me. Armed men authorized to kill me and anyone helping me. No trial, no evidence, just execution orders. Ven stood. This hearing is over. Guards, take him. I'm not finished. Kale's voice cracked like thunder. You want to execute me? Fine. But first you listen. First you hear what your council has become. We don't answer to murderers. Then answer to her. Kale looked at Brina. Tell them. Tell them everything. Brina's legs shook as she stepped forward. Every eye in the room was on her now, and the weight of their attention felt like drowning. But she'd practiced this. She was ready. My name is Brina Cole, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. And 6 months ago, Marta Fenwick sold me to Kyle Draven like I was livestock. The silence that followed Brina's words was absolute. She stood there in the center of the council chamber, mud-stained and exhausted, with hundreds of eyes boring into her. Her hands trembled, but she kept them at her sides, refusing to show weakness. That's a lie, Ven said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's not. Brina pulled the folded execution order from her pocket, the one they'd taken from the hunters who'd come to the cabin. This is your signature, Council Leader Ven. Authorization to kill Kyle Draven and anyone aiding him. No trial, no hearing, just death. She held it up, and people in the front rows leaned forward to see. Those orders were for criminals, Ven started. I wasn't a criminal, Brina's voice cracked. I was a girl who'd been beaten and sold. And your orders said I should die for the crime of surviving. The crowd stirred. Angry murmurs rippled through the gallery. Marta Fenwick sold me to traders for 200 silver, Brina continued. Those traders took me to Kale Draven's cabin and left me there in chains. I thought I was going to die. Thought I'd been given to a monster who'd do terrible things. But you know what happened instead? She turned to look at Kyle, who stood silent in his shackles. He freed me, gave me food and shelter, taught me to survive, treated me like a human being for the first time in my life. Her voice steadied. The monster in the mountains turned out to be the only person who ever showed me kindness. She's clearly infatuated, a council member said, a woman with gray hair and contempt in her eyes. Been isolated with him for months. Can't trust her testimony. Then trust this. Brina pulled out a second paper, a bill of sale she'd found in Marta's belongings during the attack. Marta Fenwick's transaction record. She sold 3 girls in the past 2 years. 3. All of them listed as unwanted labor and sold to private buyers for amounts between 100 and 300 silver. She slammed it on the rail in front of the council. You want to call me a liar? Fine, but explain this. Explain why Marta Fenwick was running a slave trade out of the Iron Bell Inn and nobody on this council noticed. Ven's face had gone pale. Where did you get that? From her body, after she tried to kill us. Brina's eyes were hard. She came to the cabin 6 weeks ago with 5 armed men, said you were offering a reward for Kale Draven, 500 silver dead or alive. She tried to take us both. And what happened to Marta and her men? The gray-haired councilwoman asked. They died. All of them. Brina didn't flinch. Kale tried to negotiate, offered to let them leave. They refused. They tried to kill us, and they lost. So he murdered them. He survived them. Brina's voice rose. And so did I. Because that's what people do when someone shows up with weapons and execution orders. They fight back. The crowd was getting louder now, arguments breaking out. Some people shouting support for Kyle, others calling for his immediate execution. Ven slammed his gavel repeatedly. Order! We will have order! But the chamber was chaos. 5 years of whispered rumors and buried questions were bubbling to the surface, and nothing could stop it now. An old man stood up in the gallery. My daughter disappeared 3 years ago. Marta Fenwick said she'd run off with a traitor, but we never heard from her again. Was she one of the 3? A woman called out, The Torrin family paid the council to look the other way. Everyone knows it. Marcus Torrin wasn't the saint you made him out to be. My brother was killed by council guards for stealing bread, someone else shouted. But the Torrins get away with murder because they've got gold. Ven was banging the gavel so hard, Brina thought it might break. This hearing is over. Guards, clear the chamber. No. The voice came from the back of the dais. Council member Helena Saris, a woman in her 60s who'd been silent until now. She stood slowly, her face grave. No, Marcus. We're not clearing the chamber. We're going to finish this. Helena, sit down. I've been sitting down for 5 years. She walked to the front of the dais and faced the crowd. 5 years ago, when Cale Draven killed Marcus Torrin, I was the one who investigated Elena Draven's claims of abuse. I found evidence, medical reports, witness statements, proof that Marcus Torrin had been beating her for months. The chamber went silent again. I brought that evidence to this council, Helena continued, her voice shaking. I recommended we pursue charges, and I was overruled. The Torrin family donated 50,000 silver to the city treasury that year, and suddenly the evidence didn't matter anymore. You're lying, Ven said, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. I have the original reports, hidden in my home for 5 years because I knew if I destroyed them, no one would ever believe the truth. Helena turned to Kyle. Elena Draven died because we failed her, because we chose money over justice, and then we compounded that failure by trying to execute the brother who sought the justice we wouldn't give. This is ridiculous, the gray-haired councilwoman said. Helena, you've lost your mind. Have I? Helena pulled papers from her robe. She'd come prepared. Then explain these. Execution orders signed in by this council for 16 people in the past 5 years. 16. All of them killed without trial. All of them conveniently people who'd accused wealthy families of crimes. She threw the papers onto the floor of the chamber, and they scattered like leaves. We've become everything we swore to stand against, Helena said quietly. We've become corrupt. We've become murderers. And I'm done pretending otherwise. She removed her council robe and let it fall. I resign, effective immediately, and I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in council leader Ven. The chamber erupted. Half the gallery was on their feet now, shouting support or condemnation. Ven was screaming for order. The other council members were arguing among themselves. And in the middle of it all, Kyle stood silent in his chains, watching it unfold. Brina made her way to his side. Is this what you wanted? I wanted the truth to matter, Kyle said. Looks like it does, at least to some people. A council member, a younger man Brina didn't recognize, stood up. I second Helena's motion, vote of no confidence. And I third it, another said. Ven's face was purple. You can't. This is a coup. This is democracy, Helena replied. All in favor of removing council leader Marcus Ven from his position? 5 hands went up, 5 out of 9 council members. The motion passes, Helena turned to the guards. Remove his chain of office. Marcus Ven, you're relieved of your position pending a full investigation into your conduct. You'll regret this, Ven snarled as guards approached him. All of you. The families that run this city won't stand for it. Then they can take it up with the citizens. Helena gestured to the packed gallery. Because this council answers to them. Not to wealthy families, not to gold, to the people we swore to serve. The guards took Ven away, and he went screaming promises of revenge. Helena turned to Kyle. I can't erase what we did to you and your sister, can't bring her back or give you those 5 years. But I can offer you something. What? A full pardon, and a formal apology from this council for the injustice done to you and Elena Draven. She looked at the remaining council members. All in favor? Every hand went up. The motion passes. Helena nodded to the guards. Remove his shackles. The chains fell away, and Kael rubbed his wrists where the iron had bit into skin. He looked stunned, like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. "You're free," Helena said. "You're free to go back to your mountain or stay here or go anywhere you want. The charges are dropped. The execution order is void. As far as Verdun is concerned, you've paid whatever debt you owed." "And the hunters you sent?" Kael's voice was hard. "The ones who came to kill me? We're acting on illegal orders. Their families will be compensated for their loss, and we'll make it clear that their deaths were the result of council corruption, not your actions." Helena's face was grave. "It's not enough. I know it's not, but it's what we can offer." Kael looked at Brina. She saw the question in his eyes. "Is this real? Can we trust this?" She nodded. It was real. Or as real as anything got in a world where justice was a rare and precious thing. "What about the slave trade?" someone called from the gallery. "What about the girls Marta sold?" "We'll investigate," Helena promised. "Every transaction, every buyer, and we'll bring charges against anyone involved." She looked at Brina. "You have my word." "Words are cheap," Brina said. "Prove it." Helena smiled slightly. "Fair enough. You're welcome to stay and watch. Make sure we follow through." "We will," Brina replied. "Someone needs to." The hearing broke up slowly, people filing out in groups, still arguing and debating what they'd witnessed. Brina and Kael stood in the emptying chamber, neither quite ready to move. "What now?" Brina asked. "Now?" Kael looked around at the stone walls that had once represented everything he'd fled from. "Now we figure out what living looks like when you're not running." They walked out of the council hall together into afternoon sunlight that felt too bright after the dim interior. The crowd that had followed them in was still gathered outside, hundreds of people waiting to see what would happen next. Some of them started clapping. It was scattered at first. A few people here and there, then more joined in, then more. Until the square was full of applause and cheers and people shouting Kael's name like he was a hero instead of a murderer. "They're applauding you," Brina said. "They're applauding the idea of justice," Kael replied. "Not me." "Maybe it's both." A woman pushed through the crowd, middle-aged, with tears streaming down her face. "My sister worked at the Iron Bell. Disappeared 2 years ago. Marta said she'd stolen from the till and run off. But I never believed it. Never." "I'm sorry," Brina said. "I don't know if your sister was one of the ones sold, but if she was, then at least now I know." The woman grabbed Brina's hands. "At least now I can stop wondering. Thank you. Thank you for speaking up." She wasn't the only one. More people came forward with stories: missing daughters, brothers killed by corrupt guards, family members who'd accused the wealthy and disappeared. Every story was a wound that had been festering for years, and Brina and Kael's testimony had finally lanced it. "We should go," Kael said quietly after the 20th person had thanked them. "This is too much." "Where?" "I don't know. Somewhere quiet." They made their way through the crowd to the edge of the square, where the merchant who'd driven them into the city was waiting with his wagon. "You survived," he said, looking surprised. "We survived," Kael agreed. "You still want that compensation I mentioned?" "Depends what you're offering." "A story. In a few years you'll be able to tell people you were part of the day Verdun's council fell. That worth anything?" The merchant considered. Yeah, I think it is." He drove them to an inn on the city's outskirts, a place called the Copper Kettle that was clean and quiet and didn't ask questions. Kael paid for a week with the last of his silver, and they climbed the stairs to a room with 2 beds and a window overlooking the street. Brina collapsed onto one of the beds and stared at the ceiling. "We did it. We did something," Kael said. He sat on the other bed and pulled off his boots. "Whether it was enough remains to be seen. You're free. The charges are dropped. That's not nothing. I'm free until the next corrupt council takes over. Until the families that lost money and influence decide to come after me anyway." He lay back and closed his eyes. "Nothing's really changed, Brina. We just won one battle. Then we'll fight the next one." She rolled onto her side to face him. "Together." He opened one eye. "You're staying. Where else would I go? Back to the Iron Bell?" "Not likely," she smiled. "Besides, someone needs to keep you from getting killed now that you're living in civilization again." "I hate civilization." "I know, but you're stuck with it for now." They rested for a few hours, then went down to the common room for dinner. The room fell quiet when they entered, all eyes turning to watch them. "Here we go again," Kyle muttered, but this time was different. Instead of fear or hostility, the looks were curious, respectful even. A few people nodded greeting as they passed. They ate stew and bread at a corner table, and slowly the normal noise of the common room resumed around them. "People are staring less," Brina observed. "Give it time. Tomorrow there'll be new rumors. Day after that, someone will decide we're heroes. Day after that, we'll be villains again." Kale sopped up stew with bread. That's how cities work. Today's truth is tomorrow's gossip. Cynic, realist. But he was smiling when he said it. They spent the next week in Verdun, watching as Helena and the new council worked to investigate the corruption. They arrested 3 more council members, shut down 2 illegal auction houses, and found records of 17 women who'd been sold through various channels over the past decade. 17, Brina said, reading the notice that had been posted in the square. 17 lives destroyed. "And now people know," Kyle replied. "That's something." "Is it enough?" "It has to be." He looked at her. "We can't save everyone, Brina. Can't fix everything. We can just do what's in front of us and hope it matters." They tracked down the families of the women who'd been sold, told them what they knew, offered what closure they could. Some of the women were still alive, bought by farms or workshops, living as unpaid labor but at least breathing. The council sent agents to retrieve them, to bring them home. Others were dead or missing, lost to circumstances no one could trace. Brina wept for them, for the girls like her who'd been thrown away by a world that didn't value them. "You saved yourself," Kyle told her one night as they sat in their room. "That matters too." "Did I, or did you save me?" "We saved each other." He stood and moved to the window. "And now we figure out what comes next." "What do you want to come next?" Kale was quiet for a long time. "I want to go home," he said finally. "Back to the mountain. Back to peace." "Then let's go home." "You sure? You could stay here. The new council would help you, find you work, a place to live, a real life." "I had a real life for 22 years. It was hell." Brina stood and joined him at the window. "The mountain's not perfect, but it's ours. That's enough." They left Verdun 2 days later. Helena Saris came to see them off, bringing supplies and a letter. "The council's official pardon," she explained. "Keep it somewhere safe. If anyone ever questions you, show them this." "Thank you," Kyle said, tucking the letter inside his coat. "Thank you." Helena looked at them both. "What you did, what you risked, it mattered. Don't forget that." "We won't," Brina promised. They walked out of Verdun in the early morning, and this time no one followed them. No soldiers, no hunters. Just 2 people heading home. The journey back took 4 days. They walked the same trail they'd descended, watching the valley fall away below them and the mountain rise ahead. With every mile, Brina felt something in her chest loosen, something that had been wound tight for months. Relief, safety, home. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting and Sable was waiting. The bear rushed toward them, as much as 800 pounds could rush, and nearly knocked Kyle over with her enthusiasm. "Missed you too, girl," Kyle laughed, scratching behind her massive ears. Sable snuffled at Brina, who tentatively reached out to touch the bear's head. The fur was coarser than she'd expected, and warm. "She likes you," Kale observed. "Or she's deciding if I taste good. If she wanted to eat you, you'd already be eaten." They unloaded their packs and went inside. The cabin was exactly as they'd left it, cold and empty, but intact. Kale built a fire while Brina hauled water from the spring, falling back into the rhythm they'd established over months of living together. That night they ate dinner at the table, and the silence between them was comfortable, easy. "What now?" Brina asked. "We just go back to how things were?" "More or less," Kale poked at his food. "Though maybe we build a second cabin, give you some privacy." "I don't need privacy." "You might eventually, when you get tired of living with a hermit." "I am living with a hermit, have been for months, haven't gotten tired yet." She set down her fork. "Besides, 2 cabins means twice the work, twice the firewood, twice the water hauling. Doesn't make sense." "You sure?" "I'm sure." She met his eyes. Unless you want me gone. I don't want you gone. His voice was soft. I just want you to have a choice. I'm choosing to stay. That's my choice. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. All right then, he said. You stay. They fell into a new routine after that. Days spent working, checking traps, processing game, hauling wood and water. Evenings spent reading or playing chess or just sitting by the fire talking about nothing important. It was peaceful, simple. It was enough. Spring turned to summer and traders came through the pass. Kyle sold furs and bought supplies, and news trickled up from the valleys below. Verdun's new council was holding firm. 3 more corrupt officials had been ousted. The families who'd run the city for generations were losing their grip. Change is slow, one trader told them, but it's happening. That's all we can ask for, Brina replied. Summer turned to autumn, and the leaves on the few hardy trees turned golden red. Kyle taught Brina to hunt, to track deer through the forest and take them down cleanly. She was a terrible shot at first, missing more often than hitting, but she improved. You're getting better, Kyle said after she made her first clean kill. Had a good teacher. She was grinning despite the blood on her hands. They dressed the deer together and carried it back to the cabin. And that night they ate fresh meat and talked about building a better smokehouse come spring. We could expand it, Kyle suggested. Put in more racks. Smoke more meat at once. We could build a root cellar too. Store vegetables if we can get anything to grow. You planning to be here that long? Brina looked at him across the fire. I'm planning to be here as long as you'll have me. Then I guess you're stuck here forever. Good. She smiled. I like forever. Autumn turned to winter, and the first snow fell in early November. This time Brina was ready for it. She'd helped stock enough wood to last until spring, had helped preserve enough food to see them through the lean months, had learned enough to survive without Kyle if she had to. But she didn't have to. They survived together, reading through long nights and playing endless games of chess. Brina won more often now, to Kyle's mock dismay. You've gotten too good, he complained after she checkmated him for the 3rd time in a row. Stop teaching me things if you want to keep winning. Can't help it. Teaching you is too satisfying. They celebrated the winter solstice with a feast, roasted venison, and the last of their dried vegetables and bread Brina had learned to bake. It wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. To survival, Kyle said, raising his cup of weak tea. To survival, Brina echoed, and to home. They drank, and the fire crackled, and outside the wind howled like it always did. But inside was warm, inside was safe, inside was home. Winter passed slowly, as it always did in the mountains. There were storms and days of being trapped inside, and moments when Brina wondered if spring would ever come. But it did. The snow started melting in March, and by April the plateau was covered in mud and new growth. Sable emerged from her winter den looking thin and hungry, and Kyle left meat for her every day until she'd regained her strength. She's family now, he explained when Brina asked why he was giving away so much of their stores. She's a bear. She's family, he repeated firmly. Brina didn't argue. She'd learned that Kyle's definitions of family were broader than most people's. She'd also learned she was part of that definition. The traders came through in late April, bringing news and supplies. Verdun was stable. Helena Saris had been elected as the new council leader. Reforms were taking hold. People were talking about justice and accountability in ways they hadn't in decades. Your story's still being told, one trader informed them. About the girl who faced down the council and the man who came back from the dead. People are calling it the trial of truth. People need better names, Kyle muttered. But Brina saw him smile. They bought flour and sugar and salt from the traders, and news that 2 more of the sold women had been found and returned to their families. 15 still out there, Brina said after the traders left. 15 we couldn't help. We helped who we could. Kale put a hand on her shoulder. That has to be enough. Does it? It has to be, because we can't save everyone, Brina. We can just do our part and hope others do theirs. She knew he was right, knew that 2 people couldn't fix every wrong in the world. But they'd fixed some wrongs, had shown light into dark corners and forced people to look at ugly truths. That was something. That was enough. Summer came again, and with it a visitor. Brina was hauling water when she saw the figure climbing the slope toward the cabin. Her first instinct was to run for the rifle, but something made her wait. The figure resolved into a woman, middle-aged, carrying a pack, moving slowly but deliberately up the trail. Kyle emerged from the cabin, alerted by Brina's stillness. "Who is it?" "Don't know yet." They waited, and eventually the woman reached the plateau. She was breathing hard, face flushed from exertion. "Kyle Draven?" she asked. "That's me." "My name is Sarah Millen. My daughter was Lily Millen. She was one of the 17. The woman's voice shook. "You helped find her, helped bring her home." "The council did that," Kael said. "Not us." "But you started it. You made them look, made them care." Sarah pulled something from her pack, a cloth bundle. "Lily wanted me to bring you this, to say thank you." She held out the bundle, and Kael unwrapped it. Inside was a blanket, hand-woven, beautiful work, dyed in shades of blue and gray. "She made it herself," Sarah said. "Took her 3 months. Said she wanted you to have something warm, something that would last." Kael stared at the blanket, and Brina saw his throat work. "Thank her for us." "I will." Sarah looked around at the cabin, the plateau, the mountains rising beyond. "I can see why you stayed. It's beautiful up here." "It's home," Brina said. Sarah nodded. "Home is wherever we make it, I suppose." She shouldered her pack. "I should go. Long walk back to Northridge." "Stay the night," Kael offered. "It's not safe to travel the pass after dark." "I couldn't impose." "You're not imposing. You're accepting hospitality." He gestured to the cabin. "We've got food and a fire. It's the least we can do." Sarah stayed. They fed her dinner and gave her Brina's pallet for the night, while Brina slept downstairs near the fire. In the morning, she left, pressing coins into Kael's hand despite his protests. "For your kindness," she insisted. "Lily would want you to have it." After she'd gone, Kael sat at the table and stared at the blanket. "You okay?" Brina asked. "I saved one person," he said quietly. "One girl out of 17, and she sent me a blanket." "You saved more than one. You saved me. That's 2. 2 is infinitely more than 0. Brina sat across from him. "Stop counting the ones you couldn't save and start acknowledging the ones you did." He looked at her, and something in his face cracked open. "When did you get so wise?" "Learned from the best." He laughed, and the sound filled the cabin like sunlight. They spread the blanket across Kael's bed that night, and it was warm and soft and smelled like wood smoke and hope. The seasons turned, summer to autumn to winter to spring. Years passed in the mountains, marked by storms and harvests and visits from traders. The world below changed slowly, Verdun's reforms spreading to other cities, other provinces. The story of the trial of truth became legend, grew in the telling until it bore little resemblance to reality. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that 2 people who'd been broken by the world had found a way to heal, had built something good from the wreckage of their lives. What mattered was that they'd survived. 5 years after their trial in Verdun, a new trader came up the mountain. Young guy, maybe 20, with nervous energy and a backpack full of correspondence. "Letters," he explained. "People writing to you, asking for help or advice, or just saying thank you." Kael took the bundle of letters and stared at it. "People are writing to us?" "Dozens, maybe hundreds. The council forwards them when traders come through." The young man shifted his weight. "You're kind of famous down there. Heroes of the Reformation." "We're not heroes," Brina said. "We just told the truth." Same thing, sometimes. They read the letters that night, sitting by the fire. Most were from people thanking them for speaking up, for giving them courage to face their own corrupt officials. Some were from former slaves asking how to rebuild their lives. A few were from families who'd lost people to violence and wanted to know how to find justice. "We can't answer all these," Kael said, overwhelmed. "We answer what we can." Brina picked up a pen. "One letter at a time." So they wrote back, told people that justice was hard and slow and often incomplete but worth fighting for, told them that survival was its own kind of victory, told them to be brave and be kind and never stop demanding better from the world. The letters kept coming. Every summer, traders would bring new bundles, and every winter, Kael and Brina would write responses by firelight. They became something they'd never intended, symbols, Proof that ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win, that the powerless weren't as powerless as they seemed. It's strange, Brina said one night, 7 years after the trial. Being a symbol, I'm still just me. That's what makes you a good symbol, Kyle replied. You're real. You're someone people can relate to. I don't want to be related to. I want to chop wood and haul water and live in peace. Then do that. The symbol can take care of itself. So that's what they did. Lived their lives, survived, found joy in small things. A successful hunt, a perfectly split log, a game of chess won through clever strategy. Found joy in each other. Brina was 35 when she realized she loved him. Not in a sudden revelation, but in a slow understanding that had been building for years. She loved the way he moved through the world with quiet competence. Loved his dry humor and his fierce loyalty, and the way he'd given her a home when she'd had nothing. She told him on a summer evening, sitting on the plateau watching the sun set. I love you, she said. Simple. Direct. Cale turned to look at her, surprise clear on his face. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. Brina, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. She met his eyes. You gave me a life. You taught me what it means to be valued. That's worth saying out loud. Cale was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very softly, I love you too. Have for years. Just didn't think I had the right. Why not? Because I bought you. Because you stayed out of necessity, not choice. That was years ago, Cale. I've had 1,000 chances to leave. I chose to stay. She took his hand. I choose you. Every single day. He pulled her close, and they sat there on the plateau as the sun turned the sky to fire. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future felt less like a threat and more like a promise. They were married that autumn in a ceremony of 2, with Sable as their only witness. No priest, no official documents, just 2 people promising to keep choosing each other for as long as they lived. I take you as you are, Kyle said, holding her hands, scarred and strong and stubborn, and I promise to stand beside you for whatever comes next. I take you as you are, Brina replied, broken and brave and trying every day to be better. And I promise that wherever you go, I go too. They kissed as the autumn leaves fell around them, and Sable roared approval that echoed across the mountains. The years after that were the best either of them had known. They built a second room onto the cabin, not for privacy but for storage, started a small garden in a sheltered spot that got enough sun, collected more books from traders until the shelves overflowed. Lived. Brina was 43 when the cough started. Just a small thing at first, barely noticeable, but it got worse. By winter, she was coughing blood, and Kyle's face went gray with fear. We need to get you to a doctor, he said. Can't travel in winter, you know that. Then I'll bring a doctor here. Kyle, I'm not losing you. His voice was fierce. Not to this. Not now. He went down the mountain despite the snow, despite the danger, and returned 3 days later with a physician from Northridge. The doctor examined Brina and gave them the news neither wanted to hear. Lung fever, advanced. Gate. He set down his instruments. I can give you medicine for the pain, but there's no cure. I'm sorry. Brina took the news calmly. How long? Months. Maybe a year if you're lucky. That's not lucky, Kyle said. His voice was hollow. After the doctor left, Kyle sat at the table and stared at nothing. Brina moved to stand behind him, putting her hands on his shoulders. We knew this would happen eventually, she said. People die. That's just how it works. Not you. Not yet. I'm 43, Cale. That's not young. It's not old enough. He turned to look at her. We were supposed to have more time. We've had 18 years. That's more than I ever thought I'd get. She knelt so they were eye to eye. You saved my life when I was 22, gave me 2 decades of freedom and joy and home. That's more than enough. It's not enough for me. I know. She kissed his forehead. But it's what we've got. So let's not waste it being sad. She was right, and he knew it. So they made the most of the time left. Read all the books they'd been meaning to get to. Played chess until Kyle started letting her win on purpose. Sat on the plateau watching sunsets and talking about everything and nothing. Spring came, and Brina grew weaker. By summer, she couldn't leave the cabin. By autumn, she was bedridden. Kale cared for her the way she'd cared for him years ago, with patience and gentleness and hands that were learning to let go. "Read to me," she said one evening as the light faded. He picked up the medical textbook, his mother's book, the one that had survived fire and time. "From the beginning?" "From the beginning." He read until his voice went hoarse, and Brina drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes squeezing his hand to let him know she was still listening. She died on a clear October morning, with the autumn sun streaming through the window and Kael holding her hand. Her last words were, "Thank you for finding me." "Thank you for staying," he whispered back. He buried her on the plateau, where she could see the mountains stretching forever in every direction, carved her name into a stone marker and planted wildflowers around the grave. Sable sat with him during the burial, her massive head resting against his shoulder. "She's gone," Kael told the bear. "They always leave in the end." Sable made a mournful sound, and Kael wept into her fur. The traders came through that winter and found him sitting on the plateau, staring at nothing. "We heard," one of them said, "about your wife. We're sorry." "Everyone dies," Kael replied. His voice was flat, empty. "Are you going to stay up here, alone?" "Where else would I go?" The trader looked at Brina's grave, then back at Kael. "She wouldn't want you to stop living." "I'm not stopping. I'm just continuing without her." "That's the same thing." Maybe it was. Kael didn't know anymore, but the traders kept coming, and the letters kept arriving, and slowly, so slowly he barely noticed, life returned to something like normal. He read the letters, wrote responses, chopped wood, and hauled water, and survived. And one spring morning, 2 years after Brina died, a girl showed up on the plateau. She was young, maybe 19, with a black eye and bruises around her wrists. She climbed the slope like every step hurt, and when she reached the cabin, she collapsed. Kael caught her before she hit the ground. "Please," she whispered, "I heard there was someone up here who helped people. Someone safe." Kael looked at her battered face and saw Brina, saw Elena, saw every person who'd ever been broken by the world and told they didn't matter. "You're safe now," he said. "Come inside." He carried her into the cabin and set her by the fire, made tea and brought food, cleaned her wounds with hands that remembered how to be gentle. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mira." "I'm Kael." He handed her the tea. "You're going to be all right, Mira, I promise." She started crying, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "I thought I was going to die." "You're not going to die, not here, not on my watch." He meant it. Somewhere in his grief, he'd found purpose again, found a reason to keep going. Brina had saved him by staying. Now he'd save others by doing the same. Mira stayed through the spring, healing slowly. Kael taught her the same things he'd taught Brina. How to survive, how to fight, how to see her own worth. By summer, she was strong enough to make her own choices. "I want to stay," she said one evening. "Learn more. Maybe help the next person who shows up." "You sure? Mountain life is hard." "So is everything else. At least here it's honest hard." She looked at him. "Unless you want me gone." Kael thought about Brina, about promises and homes and the family you build from wreckage. "You can stay," he said, "for as long as you want." She smiled, and it reminded him so much of Brina's smile that his heart ached. But it was a good ache, the kind that comes from healing instead of breaking. Others came after Mira, a steady trickle of people who'd heard the stories and needed refuge. Kael and Mira took them in, taught them, gave them space to heal. The cabin expanded. They built more rooms, more shelters. The plateau became a small community, never more than 10 people, but always someone new learning to survive. They called it Haven. Kael called it home. He died at 72, surrounded by people he'd saved and trained. Mira was there, gray-haired herself now, and 24 others who'd passed through Haven over the years, who'd learned that survival was possible and worth fighting for. They buried him beside Brina, and Sable, ancient and slow now, lay down between the graves and refused to move. "She's saying goodbye," Mira said. The bear died 3 days later, and they buried her there too. 3 graves on the plateau, overlooking the mountains. Haven continued. Mira ran it for another 20 years before passing it to the next generation. And the next. And the next. The compound grew. More cabins, a workshop, a school where they taught not just survival, but justice. How to stand up to corruption. How to demand better. How to save yourself and then save others. People came from across the province to learn, to train, to prepare for the fight against systems that crushed the vulnerable. And every person who graduated from Haven carried the story with them, of a girl who'd been sold and a man who'd bought her freedom, of two people who'd faced down a corrupt council and won, of a life built from nothing on a frozen mountain. The story spread, changed, grew in the telling until it bore little resemblance to reality. But the core remained true, that justice was possible, that ordinary people could win, that survival was just the beginning, that love could be found in the most impossible places, and that sometimes the monster in the mountains was the hero all along.